pretty sunny in Greenock at the moment. Rona, I think all elected members are here. Can I confirm that?
I don't see Mr. McVeigh. Is he here?
Yeah, I think he's just joining us now.
Ah, yes, he is. That's it.
Okay, and we have Susan from the Greenock Telegraph with us today, so welcome, Susan. Councillor Brooks, you're observing, you're very keen. So, can I remind members that if you're not speaking, can you have your microphone on mute? That goes for you, Councillor Wilson. I see you're not on mute at the moment. And if you wish to speak, can you use the chat function? Unless you're on the telephone. If you're on the telephone, just indicate in the normal way by interjecting. Rona, item 1, apologies, substitutions and declaration of interest. Do we have any?
There is an apology from Councillor C. McElhaney. Councillor Curley is substituting. And could I ask if there are any declarations of interest?
Just the usual from me, Rona. So in with regards to the Beacon and Inverclyde Leisure.
Thank you.
And the Beacon for me, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else want to indicate an interest? No. Okay, that takes us on to item 2, which is in the separate set of papers issued to you, the COVID-19 coronavirus scrutiny report. And as usual, we asked the Chief Executive to make some introductory remarks and then intend to go through the report, section by section, if there are any questions or comments. So, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Convener. This is our latest scrutiny report for members' consideration. It is slightly different this time in terms of it doesn't have any logs attached to it because we're now into the new normal sort of committee cycle, even though it's through our web system. What is different, I suppose, in this particular report is we are now providing information that's publicly available. The weekly case rate for incidents of COVID, you'll see that in paragraph 5.6. There's on page, the following page, you will see a table which gives you, or a good graph, which gives you an indication of how the current cases are going. In addition to that, a thing that's, I suppose, become of interest to members particularly is the issue of testing. And you'll see that in referred to in paragraph 6.7 and beyond, the level of testing. Now, in terms of those particular items, probably Martin and Louise are probably best placed to have if there's any questions. Other than that, Convener, I'll leave it for members to ask any questions that they may wish to have.
Okay, thanks, Robbie. Obviously, the report's a shorter report this time, reflecting the fact that we are now back into the normal committee cycle. But I think, obviously, given the sort of events in the last few weeks and the increasing sort of rates of COVID across the country, I think it's important that we do keep an oversight on these particular issues that are highlighted in the report. So, as usual, we'll just go through section by section to see if there are any questions. So, the first section is the HSCPs, paragraphs 5.3 to 5.6. Do you have any questions on that section? Councillor Wilson, your question on that section?
I think it's interesting to see the weekly case. Could we not be told these on a weekly basis?
Was that a question to me, Convener? Because I sort of put out.
Yeah, could you pick that up, Aubrey?
Louise and yourself, Aubrey.
Right. Sorry, David, you're cutting out a wee bit. Is that for Louise or me? And I didn't hear the question anyway in detail.
The question is the rates information that's in the report. Could we be, as elected members, provided with that information on a weekly basis? I mean, we obviously used to get the sort of daily COVID reports, and we're now getting them now and again, but there may well be information like this information that members would like to be provided with sort of on a regular. David suggested weekly basis? I know there's certain information available on the Public Scotland Health Scotland dashboard, but you need to go looking for that. So would be helpful potentially for members who maybe could get a weekly update in terms of the stats?
Right. Well, subject to Martin confirming, first of all, members should be aware that officers do get some information which is provided confidentially to us, certainly at my level and at the director's level. So where there's information that is available and we're allowed to share it, by all means, we will share it. Martin, in terms of the update that we've provided here, I guess that we can provide a weekly update, but you can confirm that.
Yes, through you, convener. This is public domain. The figures are taken from the Public Health Scotland website that there's a link to, and I've simply created a graph from that, calculated graph from that website. So it's relatively easy to do that. I can give you an update right this moment because obviously this is the status as of kind of last Wednesday. The current underlying rate in Inverclyde is round about 5 as of today. Now, the only health check I would put on that is you may have seen the issue with some issues round about the late reporting of results from the Lighthouse labs because of the demand from down south. And that has meant there's maybe been a wee lag in getting some of the results. So, but it tends to be correct within about 3 days. So there is no issue at all with providing that on a weekly basis. I could send that out weekly if members would like that.
I mean, I think that would be helpful, and possibly if you look at what other information you think might be helpful to members, maybe do a wee sort of weekly dashboard. I mean, I don't want it to be overly onerous. It's obviously just information that's readily accessible, but I think it would be helpful just to have an overview of the information so we can put it in context.
That's absolutely fine, convener. And we could also maybe have a look. There's some quite useful stuff on the Imperial College London website, which gives kind of projections. So we could pull that off as well. And that's public domain information. So I'll see what I can pull together. I'll send it through yourself to have a look at it before it's sent to all members.
Okay. You okay with that, David?
Yes, I'm okay because quite a lot of constituents have been asking me that figure, and the only figure I seem able to get is the figure for Argyll and Clyde. It would be nice to see the Inverclyde figure. Thank you very much.
Okay. I don't see any more questions in that section, so moving on to Education and Communities, paragraph 3.7. Any questions on that?
Sorry, Stephen.
Jim?
It's Jim McLeod here. Under section 5, regarding staff testing, it talks about the restarting up the testing centre at Port Glasgow for health staff in Inverclyde, and I just wondered if there are any plans afoot to perhaps include care staff from other agencies.
Okay, Louise, do you want to pick that up?
Through you, convener. You'll know, members will recall that all care home staff and all third sector staff are tested on a weekly basis through the Lighthouse labs. We have, and you'll see all across the news at the moment, we are busy preparing for the flu. We were hoping to vaccinate between 25 and 30,000 people in Inverclyde. And that is the focus for HSCP staff at this moment in time. You'll see in the paper that we've been having some conversations, and Martin and the team have been talking to government about having a walk-through facility where we would have 300 tests a day in Inverclyde. And until we know what's happening with the walk-through facility, we don't want to start to develop any additional testing capacity. Happy to clarify if required.
Okay, Jim, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, it's just that I had a friend that works for an agency, and she'd contacted me to say that she had a high temperature and wasn't feeling very well last week, which phoned up to ask to get a test done. She was advised to go down to Prestwick, and indeed she sent me an email today, which I'll forward on later on to you, Louise, But she was asked to go to Prestwick, and at the time she felt so unwell she could barely get in her car, let alone drive to Prestwick. And end up she did get a home test kit sent to her. But even I think she was under some duress from her employers about when she's going to get back to work, because there was I think it was 3 or 4 days before she got the results back.
Louise, you want to come back in?
And that links to what Martin said in relation to the labs, in relation to, we're doing a bit of work across GG&C to see if we can move from the Lighthouse labs to the NHS labs. I would be keen that we didn't set up any additional testing capacity until we know what's happening with the Scottish Government, and we also know what's happening in relation to the winter. My understanding is it's calmed down quite significantly. There was obviously, when schools went back, there was quite a flurry, which caused a huge demand across the system. And you can imagine across GG&C there is quite a lot of demand for testing because of the R rate and other neighbouring local authorities. But I would want us to hold where we are at this moment in time until we've got a position from Scottish Government about whether we will have an additional walk-through facility in Inverclyde.
Okay.
Okay, we move on to Education and Communities, paragraph 5.7. Any questions on that?
Yes, I have one, Stephen, please. Yeah, towards the end of the paragraph, it talks about school attendance for pupils in Inverclyde has been low since the start of term. I just wondered if we could get some figures on just how low things are, and if there may be particular, I know it has to be maybe handled sensitively, but maybe find out what schools are, where this is happening more, or if we could get some information, some figures about just, how low attendance is.
Ruth?
Okay, through you, convener. Since this report has been written, the attendance has risen for us. I'm looking at the authority average on the 2nd of September was about 84%. We're looking at in the region of 93%. Across secondary schools have been performing less well than primary schools have. ASN schools have been lower, especially at the start of term. That has since picked up, and our early years, interestingly enough, has had a fairly high attendance, but that's possibly dropping off just now. We were concerned because we were quite below the national average at the beginning of the month, more than we would want, specifically much more than we would want to be. The last comparison with the national average, we were just slightly below the national average. So our attendance has increased. We have to be very sensitive to this. There are all sorts of reasons for that. There is no real patterns amongst schools unless they've got particular, of course, they're off because of positive cases where we've had to ask classes to self-isolate. But we will continue to monitor it. We're continuing to work with heads in a sensitive and pragmatic way to make sure that we're getting as many pupils in as we possibly can.
You okay with that, Jim?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, maybe Ruth, just to sort of follow on from that, obviously that deals with pupil attendance, but critically, obviously, staff attendance is important in terms of obviously delivering education. And I know we've got a section later on in the report about attendance across the council and the HSCB, but it doesn't really deal separately with school attendance. So what's the sort of current situation in terms of school staff attendance?
I don't have the exact figures, but certainly we're not experiencing some of the issues that our colleagues across Scotland are, with teachers not being able to attend. I think I genuinely don't know what the national comparisons are, but we're not getting any reports from any of our schools that they're really short of staff at the moment. So my feeling is that without the specific data in front of us, that we're not seeing any huge issues. But I can get back to you on that to see if we're out of kilter or above the norm.
Okay. I don't see any other questions on that section. So moving on to the Environment Regeneration Resources, paragraphs 5.8 and 5.9. Any questions on that? No, don't see any. Moving on to section 6, COVID-19 testing, paragraph 6.1 through to 6.9. Any question, Elizabeth?
Yes, Stephen, just a point that I made a few seconds ago regarding tests. You know, there are a few people that I'm aware of who have been asked for the UK government testing sites. When they phoned up, they've been asked to, as I said, down to Prestwick was one person, but I believe there was other people asked to go to Stirling, which is again about a 100-mile round trip. When we've got a testing centre on our own doorstep at Parkway. Okay,
I'll bring Elizabeth in, and then if there's no other questions, I'll maybe get Martin to Louise to respond. Elizabeth?
Louise has kind of alluded, thanks Stephen, Louise has kind of alluded to the discussions that are ongoing with Scottish Government about the walk-in testing centre. I'm just wondering if we've got timescales as to when there might be a substantial update on what's happening with that. I'm sensing from what you've said that we don't have that update yet, but do we know when we're likely to get it?
Louise or Martin? Martin? You're back in mute, Martin. What's your...
Sorry, I was getting a lag there in my button. Yes, so in terms of the walk-in test site, the update we got on Friday afternoon was that the sites were being assessed over last weekend, and they hope to come to a decision potentially by the end of this week. However, they did also say that it was unlikely to be before kind of later in October by the time these sites would actually be set up. And I suppose the other cautionary thing we'd have to say is there are only a certain number of these sites, and the Scottish Government will have input to where they're sited. Obviously, they've considered places with high levels of deprivation, but realistically, they're also going to look at places with high background rates. So we'll just have to wait and see. But should we get one, it's likely to be late October, I think.
Okay. Any other questions on the testing? No? Okay, I know Councillor Wilson's got a general question. We'll come back to that. We'll go into Section 7 workforce issues to see if there's any questions on that.
Yeah, can I on Section 7, Stephen?
Yeah,
yeah, I'm looking at the. Sorry, is it okay to speak?
Yeah, sure, Jim.
Sorry, yeah, okay. Yeah, on Section 7, looking at the table and the figures, it's great to see that that obviously more people have returned to work. It's obviously been a very difficult time for a lot of people, and there's a lot of people out there who, particularly in the early days, were very anxious. We didn't know an awful lot about this virus, and there's still, we're quite right, still a high level of anxiety even now. So I just wondered if, what we're doing or what we're still doing to try and help staff who are anxious, how we're helping them to overcome that.
Okay. Stephen McNabb, are you?
Yes, thank you, Convener. Yeah.
Just go on my screen, Stephen.
Right, okay. Can you hear me okay? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Yeah, there's been a lot of activity in recent weeks supporting employees back to work. There's been a lot of work around risk assessments, particularly with people with underlying health conditions, those that were shielding, and those that are just basically anxious and concerned about a return to work. So we've done a lot of work with the trade unions in terms of getting our workplaces ready. But obviously we've been very careful to take a very cautious approach here. We're not trying to drag anybody back to work unnecessarily.
those that are coming back into the workplace are those that need to be in the workplace in order to deliver services effectively. So there is some areas where there are employees concerned and where they can work from home effectively. We're trying to facilitate that. But I think it's just basically about managers having conversations with employees and giving them the necessary support and assurance and going through the risk assessment process with them just to ensure that they are comfortable in coming back to work. And we've been doing that really on a phased basis. And maybe having people coming in initially, maybe 1 day a week, just to get them back into the office. And that's really proving to be quite successful in terms of getting our people back into the workplace and people returning to work. So that's really just a quick summary of where we're at the moment, but we're continuing to work with our employees to make sure they're supported back. Councillor MacLeod.
Okay, you okay with that, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, it's great to hear that, you know, that's happening. Can I just ask Stephen, though, are all employees being made aware that, you know, if they have any issues or problems, even with likes of anxiety, that service is available for them? Are people being informed about that? Yeah.
Yes, through you, convener. Yes, we've done a number of communications around this, around employee wellbeing and support at work. There's been a lot of work at a national level, signposting people to help as well in terms of those who might have mental health issues. So we have done quite a large-scale communication using ICON and other mechanisms, and obviously informing managers to be able to be so that they can signpost employees to relevant sort of help areas where there's resources available to support them. So we're doing as much as I think we can around that. We've designed some leaflets for employees, supporting them back to work, and some guidance around that as well. So yeah, we're making sure that we do as much communication to support employees as we can. Councillor MacLeod.
Okay, thanks.
I think it's also fair to say, Stephen, that the offer of support is there for the elected members as well. This is an anxious time for everybody, so any elected member who feels they need a bit of support, the offer is there to obviously contact yourself or the Chief Executive or whoever they feel comfortable speaking to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Section 8 is the implications. Any questions on that before I bring Councillor Wilson in? Don't see any. David?
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, we've got our recovery groups going with the humanitarian, educational and economic subgroups. What's the process for that recovery board? Which committee do they report to?
Okay, we do have a report later on in the agenda with regards to recovery plans. Can we maybe pick that up then? Can you hear me, David? David, you happy to wait till then to pick that up?
Happy to do that. Thank you.
Okay. Right, no other questions, so can we agree as recommendation, which is basically to note the information? Okay, that takes us on to item 3, the 2021 General Revenue Fund budget as at the 31st of July. Alan?
Thank you, Convener. This is the first report of the Council's overall budget for 2021. Overall, the revenue budget is projecting a £315,000 underspend, as detailed in 2.2. And the appendices reflect the costs and funding associated with COVID as agreed at the last Policy and Resources Committee. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions from members? Don't see any. Okay, can we agree the recommendation? Takes us on to item 4, 2023 capital programme, Alan.
Thank you, Convener. Again, this is the first report of the capital programme that was agreed in March, and also reflects the revised phasing that was agreed at the last Policy and Resources Committee to reflect the impact of COVID on the capital programme. Overall, the capital programme is on budget with a minor amount of advancement. Again, happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions from members? No, don't see any. Agree with the recommendations? Okay, item 5, Alan Ports and Resources Committee Revenue Budget.
It's the committee's own revenue and capital budget, and also contains details about the 2019-20 outturn and the reasons for the position that we outturned at. There's a projected underspend of £500,000 net of COVID costs as per 2.5 of the report. The capital programme is on budget. And finally, the report shows a surplus of £77,000 on the common good budget this year, being projected, and the reasons for that. Again, happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions, members? No? Okay, agree recommendations. That takes us on to item 6, Debt Recovery Performance 2019-20. Again, Alan.
Thank you, Convener. This is the annual report that comes to this committee each year at this time, and shows a good performance overall, particularly in the context of the ongoing economic challenges that the community is facing. In year was down for council tax by 0.3%, but we still achieved 95.4% of all council tax due last year was collected in year. NDR collection has reduced in year for last year, and the report flags up that this year in particular will be extremely challenging for NDR collection and businesses, and members just need to bear that in mind for next year's report. And I'm happy to answer any questions in terms of the report.
Okay, see a question from Chris.
Thank you, Stephen. It's on. It's on of the paper. What it's to do is respect to the projection for this year. Has that been based on the revenue we've received to date? Is there any evidence for that? And secondly, how will we be managing that in our ongoing budget process? Because obviously I presume that this is going to be something that is affecting a lot of local to a greater or lesser extent. So how will that sort of cash flow issue be managed in the short to medium term, and whether or not there's the officers have any views on likely long-term impacts on the council tax going forward in subsequent years?
Okay, Alan.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. It is something that there will not be an exact answer for. We started off projecting potentially a 5% shortfall in council tax for the year. Some councils are projecting double that. At this point in time, we are 1.2% behind as at the end of August. So that's 5 months into the year. So we're doing slightly better than that. Follow-up has now started. Follow-up has always been tempered by the fact that we recognise that for many individuals, their circumstances would have changed. So we sent out a soft reminder before we sent out the formal reminder. I'll be sending out a soft summary warrant letter to about 1,500 households this week before the formal summary warrant will start for those households. But we've got to start collecting the council tax through the normal processes. There has been some informal benchmarking being done across Scotland, and Inverclyde is probably in the top quartile, I would say, for lack of fact, i.e. we are achieving near our normal collection rate than over 3/4 of councils in Scotland for council tax. And you know, if I could, I'd like to thank everyone for maintaining their council tax payments, and our direct debit payments have also gone up as well over this time. So people who have maybe not been leaving the house or who've not been able to pay by their normal route have continued to find ways of paying. Obviously, part of the assessment for the forthcoming budget round will be to see if there is a long-lasting impact. We budget for a 97% collection rate, which is quite ambitious. At this point in time, I'm budgeting for a 2% shortfall this year once the dust settles. So we'll see if that is carried on into next year. If it is, that's £600,000 worth of a funding gap. But I'm certainly not sitting here today saying we need to budget for a reduction in council tax of £600,000 for next year.
Okay, Chris, you okay with that?
That That's fine. Thank you, Convener.
Okay. Okay, any other questions? No, we don't see it. Well, I think we should at least acknowledge the hard work of all the staff and debt collection partner in the previous year. And obviously this year is going to be a particular challenge, so we obviously wish them well in terms of this year. I mean, it is important that we are sympathetic and understanding in terms of people's circumstances and the impact that coronavirus may well have had on family finances, but there is help there available, so we would ask people to not bury their heads in the sand, but come and speak to us and look to get the support that is available so that they can manage their finances, and we can obviously manage our finances as well. Okay, so with that, can we agree with the recommendation? That takes us on to item 7, Customer Service Annual Performance Report. Again, Alan.
Thank you again. Another report that comes to this committee each year, and I'm pleased to say the report shows improvements in most areas for the customer service centre, and also indicates the ongoing impact of the move to universal credit and channel shift. There's some further statistics in the report to do with ICT performance later on in the agenda. Overall, it is interesting to note the reduction in time on the customer contacts that the public are having at the customer service centre as well, and obviously we're monitoring that, but there's a definite trend. So on page 53 of the agenda, you can see the 5-year trend in terms of the contacts coming into the customer service centre, or a phone in the customer service centre, or having email contact. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions, members? I don't see any in the chat. Again, I think it's important we commend the work of customer services staff, both in the previous financial year and during the course of the pandemic. And again, challenges ahead in maintaining services, but potentially opportunities as well in terms of how we deliver services. So absolutely something we need to look at. So again, can we agree to the recommendations? Okay, that takes us on to item 8, welfare reform. Again, Alan.
Thank you, Convener. There's obviously been a number of developments since the last formal welfare reform report. I think there's some key information here. First one I would highlight in the report is in Appendix 1, where it can be seen that universal credit has seen an increase in the number of claimants of 36% since February, and I expect that figure to continue to increase, particularly as the furlough scheme changes and is then withdrawn at the end of October. The report reflects the impact of changes to the policy for discretionary housing payments and the Scottish Welfare Fund that were approved at the last Policy and Resources Committee. There is ongoing liaison with other colleagues in the council and other partners to promote the Scottish Welfare Fund and DHP to ensure that individuals and families who are entitled to support know it is there, and increase uptake of some of the supports that are available. The report also includes an update in terms of the advice services and anti-poverty fund. And I think there's an important update again from colleagues in the Social Security Scotland agency and the activity that they're having within Inverclyde, and the statistics in this report, which show the uptake in certain supports that are there. And I think it was an issue that was discussed over the summer regarding the child poverty payment, or the child payment that is due to start. And it's confirmed that will now start in February, with applications being taken in November as well, and we can continue to give updates in that regard to committee. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Elizabeth, you want to come in?
I've got quite a lot of questions on this paper, if that's okay, some of which are in relation to section 5 and some of which are in relation to section 8.3. Well, I'll just fire through.
Sure, Elizabeth, yeah, just.
So the first one is about the fact that we've reported in section 5 that the DWP are ready to sort of spring into action when the furlough scheme ends. And I'm assuming that we all agree that probably this period of economic change is of concern to more than just the DWP in terms of actions that are required to spring into action for people. And I just wondered what we're doing across our kind of local, regional, national partnerships to sort of prepare for the furlough scheme ending along with DWP, or to mitigate the effects that we think it may have. So that's my first question. The second one is about the DWP funding to help people get closer to the job market, which in itself is a good thing, but again, bearing in mind that jobs are probably further away from people than they've been in a long time. What again are we able to do with our local, regional, national partners to make sure that that funding being available can actually have an impact for people positively in the local area? And the third question I've got about that section, I'll maybe stop after this section and do them separately, if that's okay. We've obviously got in the section 5 the statistic that 1 in 4 council taxpayers in Inverclyde receive help with council tax reduction. Are we peculiar in that sense? Is that a kind of high level in relation to other local authority areas in Scotland, or is that just where everybody is at this point in time? I've not really got a sense of whether we're usual or peculiar in that statistic.
Alan, do you want to pick those up and obviously bring in any of your colleagues that you're required to bring in?
Thank you, convener, and thank you for the question. In terms of what the council is doing, the council has obviously been through, there's been quite a significant increase, or very significant increase in the number of UC claimants, council tax reduction applications and other forms of support over past months. And the team, both in my services and other services of the council, Louisa's service and Stuart's service, have managed with that. So we're geared up with the resources that we've got, the resources that coped through April, May and June, and they're ready for what is coming. So from that perspective, from a people perspective, we're ready. There's clearly been increased funding allocated from the Scottish Government for the Scottish Welfare Fund for discretionary housing payments as well. So from that perspective, money is there for the council to provide its support, and there's extra funding for council tax reduction as well. In terms of the job support, I'll pass that question to Stuart, maybe once I've answered the council tax reduction question, if that's okay. So from a council tax reduction perspective, my information is that by and large, the council tax reduction uplift across Scotland is proportionate to where you are at the moment. So if you're an area which has 20% of your population on council tax reduction, and there's been a 25% increase in that, i.e. you've got to 25%. It's about a 25% increase across the board, and statistics have been gathered in that regard. But I know that the Scottish Government has allocated money subject to council leaders agreement in a week or so's time to support councils for increased demand for council tax reduction, and Inverclyde will get support commensurate to what its demand is, if that answers the question. But if I can maybe pass on to you, Stuart, about the job start and other liaison with the DWP. Thank you.
Sure.
To you, convener. Councillor Robertson, it's safe to say that it's a changing and evolving landscape with lots of changes taking place on a daily basis. With regards to the furlough scheme, we're working with the business community to see where the challenges are, and indeed we've surveyed over 1,500 local businesses and providing them with support, both in terms of potential access to the council's furlough scheme, but also business support. So we're very much in the businesses' faces just now. The Trust are working with us in respect of the existing support mechanisms that we've got for people who are being made redundant. And we're currently looking as a service at Kickstart, whereby, again, it's a DWP scheme, and it requires a commitment by us as a local authority if we're going to be a major participant in it. It's safe to say that there are some local authorities across Scotland who are very supportive of Kickstart, and there are others who are not supportive of it at all. We are evaluating what the options are, and there will be a report coming to committee in due course to ensure that we're at the front of the queue in this.
Maybe just before we move on, Elizabeth, Stuart, can you maybe give us an update in terms of the sort of youth job guarantee and how that's likely to impact in terms of Inverclyde?
We're looking at, we don't have the exact details in terms of how it's going to impact on Inverclyde at the moment, convener. Obviously, there are the headline grabbers, but what we're looking at is with DWP what the actual numbers are, so that we can ensure that we roll out a cohesive programme. You'll recall from previous reports that our More Choices, More Chances cohort isn't as big as it's perceived that it actually is. So what we're doing is we're making sure that what we've got is fit for purpose. We're also ensuring that our wage incentive can be rolled out as an Inverclyde-centric opportunity, and indeed we're having discussions about how we can potentially expand the wage incentive scheme for not just limiting it to 16 to 24-year-olds, but if we can entice employers to take people on who are older than 24 as well.
Elizabeth?
Thanks, that's really helpful and useful to know that there's other reports coming later on with more detail as things progress, so thank you for that. The 8.3 and beyond question is really just, I suppose it's just a bit of a frustration that, well, it's more than frustration actually. We've got probably the worst economic situation that we've seen in a decade, more than a decade, and yet we've got job seekers as of July having sanctions and conditionality placed back on their engagement with DWP as job seekers. And again, I'm flabbergasted as to how that works when, again, jobs are probably further away from people than they have been in a very, very long time. I noticed that in section 8.5 and 8.6 we've narrated that there are partners whom we respect who are lobbying the Scottish Government to do more about child poverty and things like that. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that we can do with partners such as those respected partners that are noted in those sections to do some lobbying of the UK Government in terms of this scenario, where people are having sanctions placed on them for not meeting standards in job seeking at the time when probably meeting standards in job seeking is probably harder than it's ever been before. I don't know who that question is to, but it is in fact my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously a political question, so it's probably a question directed at me. I mean, I think it's absolutely within our right as a committee to, and me as the chair of the committee, to make appropriate representations to either government. So if there are specific concerns around these restrictions and conditionality, which means that it would be difficult for people to comply, then absolutely I think it's only fair that we can make representations to the UK Government and ask them to be understanding of the circumstances. So more than happy, if it's a will of the committee, for me to send a letter to the appropriate minister making representations.
I would certainly welcome that, thank you.
Yeah, so unless anybody else is otherwise minded, we can agree that, but we can come to that.
Stephen.
Jim, I've got Councillor Alfield first, and then I'll bring yourself in, and then okay. Councillor Wilson. So, Ronnie.
Thanks, Stephen. Stuart mentioned the fact that some local authorities were not very enthusiastic about the Kickstart scheme, the Kickstart programme. I just wondered if he had any information as to why that was.
Sure.
Through you, convener. No.
Succinct as always, Stuart.
Thanks for that one, Stuart. That's very helpful.
But he will find out for you.
Well, that's a consolation. Thank you.
Okay, Jim.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad this paper has come before us. I know we get this, in our cycle of meetings, and I'm glad we do. It's really important that we keep our eye on these things. I mean, I think it's good that certainly there's a number of the new Scottish Social Security Agency initiatives have started up, and I'm sure that will be very helpful to a lot of families throughout Inverclyde and beyond. So thank goodness that's there. But going back to universal credit, I mean, I think we're all aghast that the percentage increase in the last few months of 36% of more people now on universal credit. We've already seen a lot of people lose jobs, and it's absolutely horrendous for people going forward. I know we've touched on it a bit further, but it's deeply worrying for me, and I think for so many people that that's going to finish. It's been a very good initiative that the UK government brought out. I just think it's terrible that they're at a time when other nations, particularly Germany, are extending their furlough for 2 years, that the government is going to pull the plug on us next month. Particularly at a time we're going into winter, we're seeing rising increases of infection levels, and there's so much uncertainty. I think rather than putting people in a dole, we should be continuing to keep people in work and do whatever we can to help people during very difficult, not just people, but companies and industries to keep going during this very difficult time. So what I would ask is, Stephen, would it be possible for the council, you've already said that you're going to write about the sanctions, would it be possible for yourself as leader of the council to be writing to the appropriate minister and urging them not to, for us to support the Scottish Government and others to call for the furlough to be extended? And if it isn't, the sort of impact it's going to have on places like Inverclyde is going to be even worse than some other areas.
I think that would, again, if it's the will of the committee, Jim, I think that's perfectly legitimate. I have made public statements already on the furlough scheme, as have others. I've also signed up to Gordon Brown's campaign that he started along with the Daily Mirror in terms of trying to persuade the government. And I know representations have been made by my party at Westminster and Holyrood. I know they've been made by the Scottish Government and others. So absolutely, I think that if it's a will of the committee that I write formally to the Chancellor to ask them to extend the furlough scheme, certainly potentially in some sort of targeted way, I'm more than happy to do that. And again, we can come back to that when we get to the recommendations.
Thank
okay,
you.
David, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Convener. I really am quite encouraged by the figures on universal credit, because the principle of universal credit is you should not get more money and benefits than you do when you're working. And I think it's proving to what that is working because of the numbers involved. I'd just like to address sanctions. You need sanctions because you need to have a certain control and discipline when you're giving out the taxpayers' money. If somebody's got an appointment, if I'm going for the 9:15 train from Port Glasgow to Glasgow and I turn up at 10 o'clock, I'll miss the train. And if I repeatedly do that, I'll repeatedly miss the train. And we do need that control in there to make sure that we've got some sort of control and some sort of organisation over it. So I would be uncomfortable, Convener, about a letter from the Council that talks about sanctions. I'm certainly happy with the other things you've mentioned.
I mean, I'm sure in terms of your comments on universal credit, David, you're not happy that there's lots more people on universal credit, because they're on universal credit because they've unfortunately lost their jobs as a result of this pandemic, which is an economic crisis as well as a health crisis. You may well agree in the principle on universal credit. I'm sure you're not happy that there are lots more people on universal credit and potentially lots more going to end up with universal credit in the months to come. I mean, in terms of sanctions, and I will bring Elizabeth back in, but in terms of sanctions, I don't think the letter is about saying there shouldn't be any sanctions. The letter is about saying about understanding the unique circumstances in which we're all living and operating in, and to be mindful of that when obviously looking at applying the sanctions. But I'll bring Elizabeth back in.
Thanks, Stephen. Just is that on a level, completely take your point, Councillor Wilson, that there should be controls in any way that taxpayers' money is spent, but that has to be consistently applied right across every sphere of how we do things as a society. And there are companies, organisations just now who are laying people off to protect their own profits, and those controls are not there to ensure that people are protected as low-paid workers, and that's what's causing an increase in universal credit. That's what's causing people to be in a position where they are unemployed at a time where there are not jobs for them to go into, and therefore they are being sanctioned for unattainable goals that are not being consistently applied as controls across the whole of our society.
Stephen?
Okay, just I'll bring you in a wee second. Ronnie's made a comment in the chat about the problem is when the train is late and they are still sanctioned. It's unfair sanctions we object to, so that's a fair comment. Jim, I'll bring you back in.
Yeah, Stephen, I'm really worried, about. I think you should still proceed with this letter. I'm sorry, I totally disagree with David. I think at the end of the day, we've got people here, a great many people, who are losing their jobs through no fault of their own. We're seeing the pandemic having a huge impact on people's lives, including their mental health. And so we've got people losing their jobs, more cases of people with mental health problems, and now we're going to sanction them. It's something really quite horrific about and draconian about all of that. And let's not forget, we've all read cases of people who have been sanctioned in the past who have died. We've heard of people who were on dialysis and couldn't afford money for their meter to keep their insulin cold enough in their fridge, and they've died because of these sanctions. So I don't think, we should be glorifying or supporting them in any shape or form. Yes, we do have to have something in place, but some of the sanctions that we've heard about and read about are simply horrific, and particularly at this time. I don't think we should be punishing people even further when they're losing their jobs and there's hope being lost. And, it's just a horrific situation at the moment. I don't think we should be adding to that.
Okay. Any other member wish to come in? No. Okay. So the recommendation in the report is to note the updates, but there's obviously two proposals on top of that. One is that I write to the Chancellor of the Exchequer to ask him to extend the furlough scheme in a targeted way, and in that letter outline the potential impact on Inverclyde of the complete removal of the furlough scheme. And the second is that I write to the Minister with responsibility for the DWP on the issue of sanctions and seek that a reassurance that the government will apply the sanctions in a fair way, given the extraordinarily difficult circumstances we are living in at this point in time. I'm sure officers will be able to draft up a more appropriate wording for me in terms of that, but that's the sort of spirit of it. We're not talking about removing sanctions altogether, but obviously, as Ronnie said, not unfairly sanctioning people. So I think we've got unanimity on the first letter. The second letter, I'm not so sure about. Councillor Wilson, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, I'm happier about the expression fair sanctions. The sanctions, in my view, have always been fair. You cannot just repeatedly not turn up for an interview and expect to get your money. So I'm reasonably comfortable with fair sanctions, and I'm sure officers can come up with a way of words.
Okay, are we happy to agree with that? Okay, thanks for that. Okay, moving on to item 9, which is the ICT Services Performance Update, and that's Alan with 2 L's.
Thank you, Convener, through you. This is the regular ICT Service Performance Update. The report also details the ICT actions in response to the COVID-19 lockdown and the subsequent requirement to find and develop new ways of working. It highlights the work to support the reopening of schools and to provide support for the Connecting Scotland programme to provide devices for pupils facing digital exclusion. Section 5 of the report highlights the COVID-19 response in some detail. It records a rapid shift from office and desk-based equipment to providing laptops and VPN connections. It highlights the global supply and distribution issues that hindered efforts to procure new equipment and the requirement to move some equipment around from the schools to enable home working. The stats in the report also show that almost 500 additional devices were allocated for home working. It shows a requirement for significant additional VPN licenses, the implementation of Cisco Jabber desktop telephony, and of course the deployment of WebEx across the authority. Section 6 gives brief details of the work completed to support the return of schools and the support to the Connect Scotland programme and the procurement of 1,200 devices for those students experiencing digital exclusion. If I can briefly share my screen with you, I know that some of the graphs are a bit hard to see in the black and white edition, so I'll quickly share my stats screen, hopefully. No, I'm not. There we go. Hopefully you can see that. You'll see that the total number of requests, I know Alan spoke to this briefly earlier on, in the customer service centre, we've seen significant channel shift details. The total number of requests from channels, as you'd imagine, face-to-face, dropped significantly, and people chose other forms of communication to talk with the council. In particular, the mobile app had a bit of a resurgence, as did telephony, and as did the e-forms. If we can move on, the same again with payments. You'll notice a significant change in the number of payments via online or telephone. Again, this will probably be reflected at some point in the future, and there will be some decisions to make around how we expand that facility to more people. Finally, it shows that the number of calls to the ICT service desk remained initially fairly stable. As you can see, there was a spike towards the end of the summer as we supported more people working from home. I'm pleased to say that the attainment level around the incidents met and the SLAs remained fairly stable throughout the process, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks for that, Alan. Any questions from members?
Yes, please.
Where you go, Jim?
Can I just ask what numbers of staff in the council, how many have been working from home, and just how well it's all been? It is something that members have asked in the past. Certainly, I have some over the years about more home working. I believe sometimes from negatives can come positives, and we've had to, using technology, we've had to have more people working from home. There are all sorts of advantages to that, where people can people perhaps with the caring responsibilities or there might be other reasons that people would find beneficial work from home. I can understand as well that there are negatives from it as well. But even from a disabled side of things, it can be very difficult for disabled people to get to workplaces or access to opportunities. Home working might be a way forward in the future for more disabled people to become employed from working from home. So I just wondered if there's been any thought given at the moment to looking to the future, and if it's been working well, could we be seeing more working from home in the future? But, there's all sorts of savings can be made from that, from office space to heating and lighting, and other benefits from reducing carbon emissions and congestion and whatever else. So, if you could get some information about that, please.
Okay, Alan, do you want to pick it up, and if you want to bring in Stephen, feel free to bring Stephen in.
Thank you, Karina. Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Yeah, we saw an increase. I'm looking at my whiteboard here. We had on average just under 200 average daily virtual private network connections prior to the lockdown. After that, we averaged about 650 a day. So probably about 450 additional home workers on average, across the main period of the lockdown. We're now down to between 350 and 400 average per day. So still a significant amount of people are working from home, mainly due to COVID-19 social distancing restrictions. Obviously, we can't really fill up the offices as we once did. We stood up 485 additional devices, and we also had about between 200 and 300 devices that were already available for use that we then, if you like, converted for use for home use. I think initially the frustrations that were felt were around teleconferencing, telecommunications while we rolled out WebEx and Jabber. I think there was a significant degree of frustration around that. But as that has rolled out and started to bed in, I think that has greatly improved how people are working within teams and within organisations. I'll pass over to colleague Stephen McNabb, if that's all right, because I know he's been doing some significant work around home working.
Okay, thanks, Alan, and through you, convener. Yes, Councillor MacLeod, there's absolutely no doubt about it. I think there's lessons to be learned from the last 6 months and the experiences we've all had in terms of home working, and undoubtedly there will be opportunities coming out of that. And we're currently going through a process at the moment where we're linking with our managers and heads of service across the council just to look at what lessons have been learned and what would make a good sort of working arrangements going forward, and thinking about the post-COVID period. And clearly there's a view now quite clearly that there are a good number of roles across the council that can be more effective, more productive in terms of having a working from home arrangement. So we're currently going through that information at the moment. We have a group set up, a corporate group that's also looking at Alan's ICT strategy, looking at the office asset strategy as well, and linking all that together. And obviously our workforce strategy around flexible and home working is going to be a key part of that. So we're hoping to review that and taking into account all that information that I've mentioned over the next 2 or 3 months ahead. But undoubtedly there is different views forming around home working and flexible working arrangements and what can work and what doesn't work. And we hope to learn these lessons and revise our policies going forward. So I hope that's helpful, Councillor MacLeod.
I'll bring you back in a wee second, Jim, but Stephen will obviously be fully engaging with our trade union colleagues in terms of these discussions, because I know certainly the other day I think the STUC made some statements around home working and expressing some concerns that it might be viewed as the new normal, but isn't necessarily in their view the most appropriate way to work. But Jim, you want to come back in?
Yeah, it's all very good, and it sounds as if there's obviously a lot of positives, but I've no doubt there will be some drawbacks. It'd be interesting to get further information as things proceed. I just wondered, how, personally, overall, do you think it's worked well? And can I ask also, what's employees' feedback? Have they been happy, content? Is the majority of them think it's worked well for them?
Yes, there is a report that we're just going to be bringing to the corporate management team shortly. We did do a survey over the summer period and into August there. We also surveyed staff that returned to schools just in the middle of August there. So we're looking at that data at the moment, and obviously the main focus of the survey was around people's experiences of working from home, the good things and the bad things, and what worked and what didn't work. I mean, although we haven't had the report finalised, at a high level, I think overwhelmingly there was a real positive impact from those that are working from home. There was some negatives. People didn't like not having the interaction with their work colleagues on a regular basis. And there obviously was some anxious individuals, and people maybe be having feelings of isolation as well, not being able to get into the office. So, but overwhelmingly, in terms of being able to work from home and work from home effectively, a lot of our employees, a majority, had the view that it was something that was a good experience for them. But we're obviously going to look at that data in more detail, and that will certainly feed into our policy reviews going forward in terms of flexible and home working.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. I don't see any other questions or comments. So we've got 3 recommendations in the report. One of them is about approving additional funding to support flexible and home working. One of them is also about recognising the dedication and achievements of the ICT team throughout the COVID pandemic period. And again, I do think we should recognise that the very hard and important work that our ICT services team put in, led by Alan, and commend them for all that good work. Certainly they've proven their value during this difficult period. So can we agree with the recommendations? Okay. That takes us on to item 10, which is the Workforce Information Activity report. We did have a members' briefing on that, Stephen.
Yeah, absolutely, Convener. This was the subject of an all-members briefing last week, so I wasn't intending to go into the detail of the report today. I wasn't going to say much more about it, other than I'm happy to take any questions that any members may have that maybe didn't get the opportunity to attend the briefing.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Any questions from members? Chris?
Thank you, Stephen. Unfortunately, I missed most of the briefing because of the General Purposes Board, so I do apologise if what I'm going to ask was covered in the briefing. What my main concern is I'm also just working off the paper copy. I'm working off the PDF, so I don't have numbers to the big numbers. So my main concern is, we'll go down a bit. It's to do with the graph about the accident or the instance. Is under section 6, health and safety activity, causes of accident. And what strikes and the trying to about that graph is that we're dominated by the first 3 items, where we've got a large amount of, we call them incidents opposed to accidents, because it's related to either verbal assault or physical assault on staff members. And I'm just wondering, first of all, how many of these assaults translate into RIDOR incidents? And second of all, what are we doing to try and mitigate what seems to be quite a substantial impact on our workforce?
Disappointing, Chris, that you couldn't share your screen with us. I thought somebody with your technical skills would have been able to do that, but I think Stephen's got the page now. Stephen?
Yes, thank you, Convener. Yep, thank you, Councillor Curley. You're absolutely right. I mean, these statistics that you're seeing here have not varied greatly. It's not a massive increase in what we've reported in recent years, although it's been an increase in the last probably 2 or 3 years, where we've implemented a new sort of reporting mechanism, an electronic reporting mechanism, which has seen more things being reported that perhaps previously were not reported. Even near misses and things like that are now being reported. In terms of it is very much, those sort of areas that you mentioned are very much around a education side of things, ASNs and the Craig Marlock School, and these are kind of the incidents that are fairly regular. However, there's obviously a key important part of this is around risk assessments. The fact that these incidents are all being reported now automatically trigger our health and safety team to look into the incidents, to have an investigation of sorts, to see whether or not there's anything that could be done to prevent a similar thing happening again, or what measures can be put in place to prevent it from happening again. So all these incidents, the whole purpose of recording these and getting them fed in centrally is for an investigation to be taken place to see if there's anything we can improve in the future. In terms of the RIDOR, I can't give you the exact figure in terms of those that are translated. You'll obviously see the graph at 6B. The next graph on the sheet shows the RIDOR reported figures for the council. And you'll see there that we have seen a reduction in the number of RIDOR reports from last year to this year. So that's maybe a bit of a positive sign, but I'm not sure exactly which ones actually relate to those specific three categories you mentioned, Councillor Curley, but there has been a reduction in the RIDOR reporting as outlined in that graph. I hope that gives you a wee bit additional information, if that helps, Councillor Curley.
Well, Chris, you like to back?
Yes, Stephen, and thank you very much. I think it's very useful that we're now actively encouraging people to report near misses, because that is where we actually, it's just by chance, it happenstance that action doesn't. It's very feed into our risk assessment, so that I'm very pleased to hear that. And I suppose the fact is that we only do that in the educated communities directorate. So I suppose in reality, it would be unfortunate if it was two instances or other instances reported to those first three items. But it'd just be interested to see in future if it is a big issue how we actually do the risk assessment. But I'm content that we've got it in hand.
Okay, thanks for that. Jim, you want to come in? Jim Clockerty?
Thanks, Stephen. It's really just a comment where I'm stating the blindly obvious. And now that I've creeped into the last age profile section, it does make us worry that we've got an increasingly elderly workforce and getting older as each of these age profile reports come up to us each year. We seem to be getting the 56 to 79 seems to be getting more and more as a percentage. Now, it's just to say that quite clearly we're going on to this pandemic that we've already spoke about earlier, and we've spoke about how scarce jobs are going to be. It's just that idea of to note that we do realise that we've got an increasingly elderly, I suppose elderly is the wrong word, we've got an increasingly older working population within the council, and really we need to try and do our best to rebalance that.
I really don't know who to bring in to respond to that particular question. You're obviously...
It's just a comment, Stephen.
But I think it's important. It's an important comment, and it's important that obviously officers are mindful of that. So Stephen's a young man, so he'll have a few years left. So I'll bring him in to answer respond to the comment.
Okay, thank you very much for that compliment. Right, okay, Councillor Clockery, yeah, absolutely. This is not something that's gone unnoticed by the corporate management team over the last 2 or 3 years. And as you rightly say, the figures of the over 55s, the percentages have been increasing year on year. So we have taken action, and we are taking action with our workforce plans, our service workforce plans, and also our succession plans to make sure that we're conscious that there's a lot of skills and experience maybe will be walking out the organisation in the next few years. We're making sure that those skills are getting transferred to those that are coming through the organisation. There's obviously a focus on younger youth employment as well. We've touched on some of the initiatives earlier in this meeting around modern apprentices, and we want to look at that again. I mean, the under 25s is an area where we've had a bit of success over the last 2 or 3 years, and you'll see the same figures in that age group that we have increased. It's not where we want to be. We want to continue to increase that percentage, but the under 25s have increased by over 100 over the last couple of years across the workforce. And so we want to actually make sure that we're introducing initiatives that will promote that and try and address that that age balance that we've got across the workforce. So I can only just assure elected members, that we are looking at these figures. We are looking at our succession plans. We're looking at our workforce plans to try and address the issue of the ageing workforce and making sure that we're doing appropriate skills transfer to to those new those employees that are coming through the organisation, or the younger members of the organisation.
Okay, thanks for that, Stephen.
Stephen?
Okay, Jim, you want to come in?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I was going to raise the same issue Jim Clockerty's raised about so it's a question that's been raised several times in the last few years about our increasingly older workforce. It's not just the ones that are 56 plus now, but the largest growing group is the ones under 56. We're talking about 40 to 56 as well, and it's a loss of that experience and knowledge when that group retires, and how we obviously need to continue to strive to get more people, more younger people joining the council. But my question also amongst the older workforce is, we know in the last few years that women who used to be able to retire at 60 are now being asked to work on till they're 66. And the impact it has on them is, we know 75% of the workforce are female. And, you know, I'm thinking, particularly for older women who are perhaps doing some jobs, it could be cleaning, it could be home care, where, you know, some of the jobs can be quite heavy. I just wonder what impact that's having, health and safety wise, for any older female workers. What are we doing to address issues like that, Stephen?
Okay, Stephen McNabb, you want to pick that up?
Yeah, okay, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, clearly we have got an ageing workforce, and obviously with there is no retirement age technically now in terms of our workforce, and that's why we're probably seeing a lot of increased percentages at that top end. You know, we do have people who are, you know, between 65, 70 even. We've got a couple of lollipop people around 80, I think. So there's no sort of set retirement age. So I mean, I think in terms of, I mean, the health of the employees is very important in being able to carry out their duties effectively, and that's something that managers would seek to do. Clearly, there's often, there may be issues with absenteeism, you know, around that. If people have underlying health issues, or they're unable to perform their manual duties, then we've obviously got our supporting attendance policy, which would kick in to try and support such individuals, either to stay in employment, redeployment. If it turns out that the job for them that they're in is not suitable for any reason, we would try and look at any redeployment alternative. I mean, ultimately, if people are unable to do or for not fit to do their job, then there's the potential for ill health retirement as well, and there's a process that we would go through to do that. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, it can potentially be an issue, but I think we've got a number of policies in place that would support individuals who may be struggling, whether it's physically or whatever, to do their job, and there's alternatives that can be explored that managers can do that with our employees.
Yeah, just to come back, I mean, I'm thinking for older people, it's perhaps in home care, have we seen any increase in injuries or people getting hurt or becoming sick? And I understand that you say that people can stay on, there's no retirement age as such, but the pension is now that it's 66 going up to 67, and it's not a case that people want to work, they don't have any choice to matter, they have to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think through you, convener, there's no sort of obvious increase in accidents around home care or on that kind of level. I think what we have seen is I mean, any issues with accidents, as I've mentioned, that come up, you know, we get them investigated, and if there's actions to be taken, then we would do that. And if it means that people are not quite fit to do their tasks, then that can be addressed. I think where we have seen, I mean, we monitor reasons for absence across the council. So everybody that's off sick, we drill down into the reasons for that. And things like musculoskeletal absences, they have stayed very constant, you know, over the last few years. Where we are seeing an increase is around mental health and anxiety. and that's an area that we're sort of focusing on in terms of supporting and making sure people have got the support in that area. But I wouldn't say that there's a real strong correlation between age and accidents that I'm aware of at this moment in time, Councillor MacLeod.
Is that accidents and injuries? Yeah.
Yeah, accidents and injuries. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think it's certainly something that we can look into in close detail, because we do look at the age profile of the accidents that we have. I don't have the figures in front of me, but that's something we can explore. And obviously, if there are issues around that, we can take appropriate action. But I'm not aware of any offhand.
Yeah, it was more injuries I was thinking about. Sorry, I think I might have stressed accident, but injuries. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Stephen.
Okay.
Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat, so happy to agree with recommendations. This is essentially a note report. Okay, that takes us on to item 11, Corporate Services Cdip End of Year Progress Report and Corporate Director Improvement Plans Annual Refresh, and Louise is going to speak to that.
Thank you, Convener. So this is to provide you with the End of Year 1 Progress Report and the Cdip's Annual Refresh. It's to present to committee with the End of Year Progress Report, the Refresh Corporate Director Improvement Plans, the Cdips, that are the responsibility of the Council's corporate services as detailed in the respective Corporate Director Improvement Plans. A report was scheduled to be considered in May this year. However, due to the COVID pandemic, this was suspended till now. Section 5 of the report provides the final year progress and is attached as Appendix 1, which provides information on the status of the actions as at July 2020. At that point, 7 actions were completed. 2 actions were showing significant slippage. There was 5 actions showing slight slippage, and 7 actions were on track as at, as I said, July 2020. Section 6 of the report provides information on the Cdip annual refresh and is attached as a full report in Appendix 2 of the report for your information, and provides the key performance indicators and data taken into cognizance of the impact and challenges of COVID-19. It is recommended that the Policy and Resources Committee note the progress made by the Council's corporate services in delivering year 1 of the improvement actions, and approves the corporate services improvement actions within the refreshed Environment, Regeneration and Resources and the Education, Communities and Organisational Development Corporate Directorate Improvement Plans. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Louise. Elizabeth, do you want to come in?
I do. Thanks. Thanks, Stephen. I think, Louise, first of all, this probably gets the award for the longest title of a committee report that's ever been before us. I've got 3 questions. The first one is about page 123, if that's okay. And it's actually the impact on outcomes side of things. And we were just looking at the bit where it says Audit Scotland is assured that Inverclyde Council is able to demonstrate impact on outcomes for all its children, citizens and communities, as a how will we know we're going to get there? And I'm just wondering, how does that work as a measure? What are we hanging our hat on there to say that that's something that has been improved? Is my first question. I'll go through them individually if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fine. I mean, obviously that issue is also covered in the next report on the best value. Louise, you want to pick that up? And then if required, bring in any of your colleagues.
Sorry.
Sorry,
Elizabeth, you were actually breaking up halfway through. I couldn't hear the question.
Right, so it's basically the bit where it's saying Audit Scotland is assured that Inverclyde Council is able to demonstrate impact on outcomes for all its children, citizens and communities as a means of knowing how we will know that we're getting there. So I'm just wondering how that statement actually translates into a measure that we can hang our hat on.
Well, and again, as Stephen mentioned at the end there is obviously a lot of discussion at the moment around how we measure impact, and there isn't one specific tool. So we use a range of tools from Audit Scotland to information that's coming through the Corporate Directorate improvement plans to try and get a suite of measures to show outcome indicators around wellbeing.
Okay. I'll mull that one over. And maybe
for the next report, because you could ask the question again in the next report.
I might do.
Carry on with your question.
Second one is big page 132. And it's about the SME activity. And really, again, we've had a lot of discussion already in the meeting about the kind of change in economic context that we're in, the fact that things are probably worse than they've been in an awful long time. And I would suggest, this is a suggestion, that to maintain and grow our business base is going to take more than what we've got in RP1, given that things are worse than they were when this was all written. So I'm just wondering what else we're doing, what else is going to be kind of included there to take into account that just doing what we thought we were going to have to do is probably no longer going to be sufficient.
Okay, maybe bring Stuart or Scott in, because I suppose it does tie in a wee bit to the sort of discussion we had earlier and the sort of recovery plan as well. So Stuart or Scott, or both.
If I could start off in that one, it is something that we pick up in the recovery plans, both in the partnership recovery plan and also the corporate recovery plan. And if we maybe pick it up at that point in more detail, unless Stuart wants to add something.
Through you, convener. Obviously, there's the existing SME activity, and that's where our focus has got to be in terms of ensuring that businesses survive this. What's interesting is that in terms of the business gateway activity, whereby that's new start businesses, we're actually ahead of curve compared to this time last year, which is counterintuitive to what everybody's expectations would be. But we're something like 10% ahead of curve, and that's something that we need to continue developing as well. But as Scott says, as part of our recovery plan, we're looking at the bigger picture.
Okay, Elizabeth.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful as well. And my last one is big page 168, and this was a kind of 4 o'clock in the morning thought. Enough. And it's actually just about the link that we continue to have, and we've had it for a long time, between what we're trying to do in terms of repopulation and tourism activity in the area. And I'm just thinking back to the discussions we've had this time round, and also the last time round when we were looking at the NRS statistics, that actually it's our natural change that's more significant in terms of our population and what we're trying to do in terms of repopulation that way. And I'm not going to return to the we all need to have more babies conversation, but you know, it's that natural change that's more significant in terms of the repopulation. So I'm wondering if it's time, and it's just a suggestion, I'd love to hear what people think about it, about actually separating our tourism aspirations and the actions that we do in terms of tourism, the strategy we have for that, from the purpose of repopulation, to kind of free it up to go off in its own direction and perform all the functions that it might perform for us, and not just anchor it to that one particular aspiration for increasing the population.
Okay. Scott, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, happy to come in. We might all have different views on this, but we certainly see the tourism aspect as being sort of closely linked to promoting indoor flying. So it's an aspect of promoting indoor flying to everybody, to its residents, to visitors and to businesses. And the flagship just now is the Discover Indoor Flying website. So I think from my perspective, there's such a strong link between tourism and regeneration and repopulation. I would like to see them separated. There's maybe a discussion around about how we present them in our pocket documents. You know, that's something we might want to discuss moving forward.
Okay, Elizabeth, you want to come back in?
No, it's just it's things that we've linked together for a long time for a very good reason, but the statistics are starting to show is that they're maybe not as necessarily closely linked as they have been. So I just think if we've got aspirations for tourism and things, then don't fetter them by constantly anchoring them down to having a repopulation function. Is just where I was coming from.
Okay, officers, I've heard your comments. Okay, Ronnie, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I've actually got quite a few questions, if you don't mind.
No problem, Ronnie.
I'll try and be as quick as I can. The first one is in page 133, and it's RP4, and it's the point about town centres. The statement says that there are significant challenges which threaten the future viability of our town centres. So I guess my first question is: Are we suggesting here that all of our town centres are basically threatened? That's the first part of it. And in the second bit about where do we want to be, it says working in partnership with the business community, blah, blah, blah. So my question there would be, who will we work with in the business community and how will we select them? So that's my first question. I can go on or I can wait for a response on that, Steve.
We'll take them one at a time, Ronnie, probably.
Okay.
Just as easy. Stuart or Scott?
Thank you, Convener. I'll come in very briefly, then I'll invite Stuart in. I think firstly we've got the Regeneration Forum, so there is a forum already for Port Glasgow, Greenock and Gourock that has representation from the business community. But through the recovery plan process, we also have the Regeneration business subgroup, and that's giving us access to a wider business base that includes the Chamber of Commerce and the FSB. So I think there is a forum there to assist us, but I'll pass to Stuart to maybe put a bit more detail on that.
Through you, Convener. The only bit of Councillor Alfield's question that I don't think Scott's answered is, do we think that our town centres are under threat? And there's a resounding answer to that, and that is yes. And it's not just limited within Inverclyde, that's across the whole of the UK. Since COVID, people's shopping patterns have changed dramatically, and the town centres are very much under threat. Clearly, there are businesses which have benefited during the lockdown measures, but there are also businesses who have still not reopened, and that's of grave concern. The potential levels of vacancy within our town centres are of utmost concern to us. But as Scott said, the forum for that is very much within the Economic Recovery Group with the business space that we have as a sounding board.
Okay, Ronnie?
Yeah, thanks for that, Stuart. Just to come back to you on that. I mean, I agree entirely with you about the number of voids we have, but would it be the intention, do you think, in the future sometime to offer perhaps reduced rates or incentives to people to basically come up and set up business in town centres? I'm conscious that in my world there's a pop-up shop in our main shopping centre which is phenomenally successful, and I just wondered if there would be any intention to kind of follow that model.
Sure.
Through you, Convener, as I alluded to Councillor Robertson earlier, we're looking at a number of interventions and they will be subject to report. But specifically to address Councillor Alfield's concerns, we're looking at a number of specific business interventions, both for new start businesses and existing businesses in terms of their support. Okay,
thanks, Stuart. And it's still with you, Stuart, if it's okay, Stephen. It's page 137. I think this is a normal question I ask you, Stuart, and usually you're as brief. You're quite brief on your response. It's actually in the business startups, right? Number of business and property assists. And my question is always the same. Okay, well, it looks okay, 25, but my question is, how many applications did we have? Did we turn any down or did any fall by the wayside?
Through you, Convener, eligibility is the only thing that allows us to turn people away, Councillor Alfield. What we want to do is to support as many businesses as we possibly can. So eligibility is the only area that would prevent us supporting a business. But you also recognise that where we may not be able to support a business with a particular intervention, we always try to find some kind of support for them, and that's a wee bit longer of a response than you normally get.
Yeah, I'm quite surprised with that, Stuart. Can I go to page 139 now, if you don't mind? And it's a question about how we know we're getting there on full use of community asset transfers. And I'm conscious that the Community and Power Act was in 2015. So my question is, what kind of interest do we have locally from organisations who are potentially keen on following a community asset transfer pathway? Do we have any indication as to how many groups, if we do have them, who are interested in doing that?
Okay, Louise, do you want to try and pick that up or identify the appropriate officer to?
Through the Community Empowerment Act, the Community Asset Transfer has been processed through Community Learning and Development. And as far as I know, there's maybe one group who has an interest at the moment. I couldn't tell you how far that's been progressed or what stage that's at just now.
Do you think, Louise, we should be doing anything to kind of promote it better?
I think we could do more to promote it, and obviously it's within the Community Empowerment Act that we would be promoting it better. But there's maybe a communication there to talk to the communities to find out what else we can do to highlight how communities can go about community asset transfer.
Okay, thanks for that. And I guess my second last question.
Ronnie, before you ask your next question, it might be an idea if we get a specific report to the relevant committee on community asset transfers, just to see what we are doing to encourage and support them.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. Really good idea. Good suggestion. Thanks, Stephen. Page 147, and it's a very, very quick one again, I hope. And it says, how we get there in terms of volunteering. And the point it made here is increased number of people volunteering, particularly young people in the age group 13 to 18. So my question is pretty straightforward. How would we intend to do that?
Okay, Louise, you want to on that?
Again, through you, convener, that's a community learning development question. Ruth might be able to take more details about that.
Okay, there's several vehicles to get there through you, Convener. The first is the Duke of Edinburgh, where we have a high uptake, and that's obviously volunteering is part of that. That's heavily monitored by CLD. The other one is the Youth Philanthropy Initiative, which now all of our schools are part of. And as part of that, the children promote a charity or an opportunity to work in a philanthropic way, and that has taken off in our schools very, very successfully. You'll see that the actual volunteering strategy has perhaps been put on hold, and I think where the place we left it is perhaps a different place to where we will resume it and what that will look like. But we've got to be very cognizant of the huge volunteering impact across the whole of Inverclyde as well. But specifically, your question was about how we will monitor and measure the youth ones, and so there's those two particular measures.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks, Ruth.
But again, information on that will get reported through the sort of normal reporting cycles as well.
Yeah, that's good. And I can think of one or two other ways potentially that we could do it. So it'd be good to have that conversation. And you'll be glad to know, Stephen, my last question for the moment is on page, can I find it? 165. And it's about Clyde conversations and how we know we're getting there. Clyde Conversations 2020 is developed and delivered, I think it's, developed and delivered. So my question is, when can we see an implementation plan? If there's one available at the moment, I haven't seen it, and I'd be interested to know when we might be able to see that. Thanks.
Okay, Ruth, are you want to come in on that?
Through you, Convener, we were talking about that the other day, and exactly what that particularly looks like, and also its influence on the Children's Services Plan. So happy to bring a report to the next Education and Communities Committee on that.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Thanks, Stephen. That's it. You'll be glad to know.
No problem, Ronnie. Thanks for the questions. Okay, I don't see any other questions, so can we agree the recommendations? Who's got their phone ringing? Okay, that takes us on to item 13, if I can find it. Okay, so item 13 is a request from myself, which is based on a request that I received from the Europe Must Act Scotland campaign, which is highlighting the humanitarian crisis in the Aegean Sea area.
Steve, you get item 12 first.
Oh, sorry, if I jumped to item 12. Oh, sorry, I have. That's my fault. Sorry about that. Okay. Item 12 is Inverclyde Best Value Assurance Report, Improvement Plan Progress Report. Louise?
Yes, thank you, Convener. You had me in a panic there. So this is to provide an update on the Best Value Assurance Report and provide an overview of the main points from the latest Audit Scotland BVAR from other councils. As you know, the BVAR and the Improvement Plan were developed to address recommendations made to Inverclyde Council by Audit Scotland in 2017. The current status of the 10 BVAR improvement plans as at the end of July 2020 is that 6 of the actions are now completed. 2 of the actions are showing slight slippage, and 2 of the actions are shown as being on track. Audit Scotland has published a further BVAR reports on other local authorities this year, including Highland, Argyll and Bute and North Ayrshire. The main findings of this are outlined in section 6 of the report, with links to the full reports are available online. There's some potential improvement actions that will be taken forward by officers outlined in that. A link is also provided within the report on the Audit Scotland Equal Pay and Council's Impact Report 2020. And it's recommended that the Policy and Resources Committee notes the progress made by Inverclyde Council in regard the BVAR improvement plans as set out in Appendix 1. Notes that the Audit Scotland Best Value Assurance Report on Highland, Argyll and Bute and North Ayrshire have been published and the links are included. And note Audit Scotland's Equal Pay Council's Impact Report has also been published. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks Louise, and apologies again for missing out your report. Any questions from members? Elizabeth, do you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry, I hadn't really meant to, and I guess it does go back to my previous point in the last paper. I'm not even sure from this how this links in with the previous report. I know we have so many reports and so many different things, that documents that we refer to and we use and we work to. Just help me understand how this one links to being a measure for the other one. If that's okay, Louise.
Louise?
How this helps, this outlines how we are measuring on the impact, and I know that I'd said in the previous that we're looking at a variety of reports, as you said, that shows what directors and services are doing, that measures their own impact within their own service and organisations, including looking at other local authority based value reports, including looking at self-evaluation within their own team, and having a look at the LGBF, and then linking that back into the high level outcome measures that they've put in place.
Elizabeth, you want to come back in?
Okay, no, that's useful. Just as between this paper and the last paper, there's a lot of reporting there. But I feel as if I'm having to dig into it to find what our impacts are.
Well, I mean, obviously, this report is a bit specifically on the best value audit report, and I suppose the actions that are in this report, some of them are, if not all of them, have been subsumed into the previous report as well. And clearly, there is a link between one of the actions from this report, which is the BV4, measuring the impact of outcomes, and that's included essentially in that previous report. And I think when we discussed the recommendations from the best value auditors, and I remember asking at the time is like, well, what is the answer to the question? And the auditors couldn't provide the answer to the question. And I think all the best value audits that have taken place since then, they provided the answer to the question. And I'm not so sure there is an easy answer to the question. But clearly we do want to measure impact. We want to measure outcomes. So we need to try and refine that and develop it. And maybe it is something that would be useful to get a specific report on about sort of how we look to try and measure impact as best we can in it. It might be proxy measures for impact rather than being able to measure impact directly. So I think maybe that would be worthwhile just to get a specific report on that.
Stephen, if I could just maybe come in. I mean, there is academic debate going on ad infinitum in terms of how do we measure outcomes. I'm very clear in my mind that measuring outcomes is almost like grabbing fog. What you want to do is you can tell if you're achieving outcomes by looking at trends in outputs. In other words, we're saying our general outcome for Inverclyde is that it's becoming more economically active and the economy is growing. There will be a number of specific outputs, number of jobs, investment, and a range of things which will, as you look at them in the trends for more jobs and the trends for more investment, that gives you those combined outputs give you very specific indication that certain outcomes are being achieved. And outcomes are not something that can be measured in a matter of 1 year or 6 months. So I think there's a lot of debate, particularly in the policy population about how and a lot of cogitating. Bottom line, I think that's the way we do it, and that's the way we should concentrate our minds. But certainly, a report can come forward, convener.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be useful to get a report and for those views obviously to be reflected in that report, because I mean, at some point in the future, I suppose we're going to get a full best value audit, but we're also these sort of actions are reviewed as part of our annual audits as well, and the auditors will be expecting, suppose, progress towards us achieving these actions. So I think it would be useful, certainly for us as elected members, to just get a better understanding of how we're seeking to achieve that outcome. So we're happy to have that for the report. Okay. Any other questions anybody wants to raise? No? Okay, so with that we'll agree the recommendations in the further report. Okay, now it does take us on to item 13, as I was saying before Elizabeth rudely interrupted me. So there is a humanitarian crisis in the Aegean Sea. I don't know if people can see it on their 10 o'clock news. I saw a feature recently on one of the big camps in one of the islands in Greece, and the camp had been largely burnt down. I mean, people are living in atrocious conditions in these camps. We, as a council, have a good track record with many other councils across Scotland and the UK in supporting resettlement programmes. In our own case, the Syrian programme, and also supporting the resettlement of the Afghan interpreters as well. And I think potentially we could have a role to play in terms of addressing this crisis. And I think it's important that we do play a role. So the report specifically is seeking us to support the campaign by writing to the Home Office and also pledging to relocate refugees from the Aegean Islands. Now, we can't obviously make that pledge until we've had a detailed report from officers that demonstrates that we can actually play a role here. So I'm asking that we do have a report to the next meeting of the council on what role we could potentially, what level of support that we could provide. And obviously, once we get that report, then we can obviously decide if we're in a position to make that pledge. So I think at this point in time, rather than writing to the Home Office and also pledging our support, we should get a report to the council, and then based on that report, we should take a final decision as to whether we wish to progress, writing to the Home Office, etc., and pledging that we can assist in the relocation of these refugees from the island camps. So happy to hear any other views and comments.
Stephen?
Jim?
Yeah, Stephen, I wholeheartedly agree with you, 100%. I think in Inverclyde, west of Scotland, the UK, over decades, many years, we've been very welcoming to all sorts of cultures and races, from the time of the Irish in 1800s to Asians in 1950s and 60s, Ugandan citizens in the 1970s, and more recently, as you say, the Syrian and Afghan families locally here in the last few years. I think the pictures that we see are absolutely horrifying. People don't risk their lives crossing seas and continents unless there's good reason for doing it, and leaving family and friends and their homes behind. They're living in terrible conditions. I think we should be doing all we can. I think you have a look at Germany, have taken over 1 million refugees, and it's not had a huge impact on their economy. Germany is the strongest economy in Europe, one of the strongest in the world. So there's been lots of positives. The other thing as well is that, some observers are saying in Scotland we have a population of 5.4 million people, that for the future, because of our demography, we're going to need somewhere around about 6 million people. Now, over the last 100 years, Scotland's population hasn't risen that dramatically compared to other parts of the UK. So I believe there is capacity, there is room for us to bring people here, to give them a life. And let's not forget, many of these people have trades and qualifications. It could be working here and helping to produce and help to blend in with with the rest of us. And before we maybe get any negative comments, remembering that Boris Johnson was talking about bringing 3 million people from Hong Kong if necessary. So I think there is room for us to play our part, for Scotland and the UK to play a part, and to bring people here.
Okay, thanks for that, Jim. Any other comments? So we're happy to support in principle the campaign, but have a report to the September 2020 meeting of the Council on how we could potentially play our part in relocating these refugees. We don't see any dissent. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, that takes us on to item 14, the 2021-23 budget, current position and proposed approach. Alan?
Thank you, Convener. This is a short report updating the committee on the plans for the forthcoming budget. The report outlines the range of funding shortfall projections, which has a mid-range projection of £10.7 million before council tax for the 2-year period. The report also highlights probably the unprecedented uncertainty that is around cost and income in respect to the macroeconomics around the budget, of which will impact on the council. The report highlights a number of proposals in section 2.5 and then leads to recommendations regarding the committee being asked to note the current range of scenarios outlined, agrees the approach to be taken in respect to the 2021-23 budget, and recommend that the committee agrees that the corporate management team progress to develop a 2-year revenue budget. Chance, any questions?
Okay, thanks, Alan. Tommy, I see that you put a question in the chat. I don't know if that was relating to the last item or this item.
No, it's this item, Stephen. And I know in item 5.2 we're we're making another allowance for £3 million to mitigate the impacts of the COVID crisis. And this would be over and above the 5.8 we've already done. So my question maybe for yourself, convener, and Alan, yourself, your contacts at COSLA, and Alan, with any discussions he has with other chief financial officers, of further for councils to deal with the COVID crisis, because my concern would be the 3 million, we need to find it from somewhere, so that would impact on jobs and services in the next budget in 2021.
Well, at this point in time, COSLA is continuing to make representations. There has been some additional funding agreed recently, which was £49 million of consequentials that's come from the UK government, and after a number of weeks of discussion, it's been agreed that that money will be distributed to councils, so we'll be getting a share of that, and Alan will be able to put a figure on that. There's also another scheme that again has come as a result of UK consequentials, which is a loss of income scheme, which has been finalised, I think, where basically councils can submit details of income they've lost, and potentially this fund could compensate them for some of that. We won't compensate for all. I think that the quantum was yet to be agreed, but it could be somewhere in the region of £90 million or so. Along with the Scottish Government, COSLA has been making representations to the UK Government for various flexibilities for councils to have this year, which potentially helps in the short term, but potentially in the medium term as well. And those sort of representations and discussions are ongoing with the UK Government. There's also been discussions about potentially how the Scottish Government could give more flexibility to councils as well. But the reality in terms of looking to the future and next year and beyond, I suppose we're all waiting to see what the Chancellor decides as part of his autumn budget, and then following on from that, the Scottish Government's approach as well, in terms of what level of funding they've got, what sort of decisions they might make around taxation, etc. So at this point in time, we're dealing with probably the greatest level of uncertainty any of us have dealt with in our time in local government. So we simply don't know what the future holds at this point in time, Tommy. I think local government has done a good job in terms of pressing both the Scottish Government and UK Government for extra funding, and we've had a significant amount of extra funding, but the future will be very challenging, and if we don't get extra funding over and above what we hope to get, I mean, there will be real serious issues for councils. There's no doubt about it. Alan?
Yeah. Things will evolve over coming months, and reports will be brought forward to this committee via the Members' Budget Working Group. But the convener's correct that I'm awaiting formal notification to get maybe £730,000, being now a share of the £49 million that was announced some time ago. Still awaiting the details of the income loss scheme, which has to be negotiated with the UK government, and I know the specific be rolled. Clarify, at the moment, the council has agreed £4.8 million extra because some of the capital existing allocations, but sorry, that contingency will go up and down depending on extra funding that we come in and extra cost pressures. I think I'd also just take the opportunity to highlight to members the significant extra funding which the council has either come up with directly or dispersed on behalf of government, coming from consequentials from the UK government, that at the moment the cost of COVID for, if I can put it this way, for Louise and the IJB is estimated to be £6 million. On top of that, there has been £8 million of non-demand loan. On top of that, there is £11.5 million worth of business. I suppose if I cut to the chase, the point is that already before the furlough scheme in Inverclyde, £40 million spent on addressing COVID, and that's been about our partners. So sustain that into 21, 22, somebody's going to have to find a huge amount of money. So there will be that we have to face, and that's on top of the existing £10 million fund that this report covers.
Okay, Tommy, you want to come back?
I didn't catch a lot of that, Stephen, but Alan's here, but I can speak. The update.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay, can we agree with the recommendation? Okay, that takes us on to item 15, recovery plans, community and corporate. I think Aubrey and Scott are going to speak to this.
Okay, Convener. This report, item number 15, is for members' consideration in terms of two plans. First of all, there's the Community Recovery Plan, which has been prepared under the auspices of the Inverclyde Alliance Partnership. The plan is yet to go up to the full Alliance Partnership Board, which it will do in October. But it's here for members noting. I'll pick up on the issue which Councillor Wilson brought up in terms of the governance and how that operates. The plan is identified in pages 203 to 236, and members should be aware that we are looking specifically from them the confirmation of funding around a number of areas identified in paragraph 2.3. in relation to cultural events, remembrance events, and economic case for increased support. By the way, Convener, am I still coming through?
Yes.
Okay. I just heard it flickering a bit. Separately, we have then got the organisational one, the council's recovery plan in pages 237 and to 251, of which it is asked for members' approval of the plan. Officers, early doors, and indeed, no doubt, as members would know, we're frantically dealing with some of the emergency planning issues, early doors. And as we start to come through the various stages of the route plan and into a situation where we can start to move forward with a level of recovery, we thought it was good, essential, really, to have both partnership and organisational recovery plans. Members should also be aware that each of the directorates have individually got their own service improvement plans. So there's a lot of detail, and I suppose the objective behind the organisational recovery plan is the sort of big picture stuff, which I know Scott will maybe want to go in a little bit of detail, but maybe not too much. Leave it with that.
Okay.
Convener.
Thank you, Convener. I don't have much to add to what Aubrey said there. I think under the Partnership Recovery Plan, if I could just flag that that includes a section that was fed by the economic subgroup looking at recovery. Under the Corporate Recovery Plan, I think I'd just like to highlight that the plan identifies that every aspect of council services have been affected by COVID. You know, from education to frontline services, nothing is operating now as it did pre-COVID back in March. It identifies the need for changed operating models across all service areas that are reflective of the stage of lockdown easing that we're in. So we're in phase 3 just now, which we're progressing through in stages, and then we move into phase 4, and our operating models need to change to reflect that. So we still have things like social distancing in frontline services, social distancing in offices and complying with guidance. The COVID situation and the recovery plan is going to require us to have corporate actions across all areas, such as budget setting, policy review, and economic strategy. And you'll notice there's a particular item in economic strategy in the corporate recovery plan, governance and ICT, again in the context of the existing COVID situation. We're still in the pandemic, but also the post-pandemic circumstances. So again, I would just ask members to note the recommendations and we are happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Scott. I'll take Ronnie and then Elizabeth.
Thanks, Stephen. Just one question, and it's about the COVID Partnership Recovery Plan. It's on page 222, and it's about addressing long-term unemployment. And I guess that's something that we should all be extremely conscious of, given that the predictions of young people unemployed in Scotland next year, depending on what report you read, could be as many as 140,000. So the reality for me is that this should be a major focus, major impetus for us in Inverclyde. But my question basically is, are there any new initiatives that we intend to try to roll out to address this definitely increasing number of young people in the kind of 16 to 24 age group who are going to be looking for employment?
Okay, Scott, you want to pick that up?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, you'll see at the short-term actions the bid against the Anti-Poverty Fund, which I think was approved at the last committee. And there's also a series of, we're anticipating bidding for further funds, but I'd like to bring in Stuart just to talk a little bit about the detail of what we propose to do.
Sure.
Through you, Convener. The previous committee approved a number of interventions in respect of young people for the anti-poverty monies. Cohort 1, which is the cohort that we carried out a pre-apprenticeship programme for last year, have all been offered level 2 modern apprentices. We're introducing a new cohort and they will have the same type of activity as the previous cohort had. And also what the council has agreed to is that the 5 modern apprentices who were due to leave the modern apprenticeship programme have all been offered a 2-year entry-level post within the council. As I've said on a number of occasions earlier, to answer Councillor Arfield's specific question about whether it's, no matter whether you look at the worst case scenario of 140,000 young people or 100,000 in median or 80,000 in the best case scenario, there will require to be special interventions for that. And I'm bringing a report to the corporate management team, which will then in turn go to the appropriate committee seeking special interventions.
Yeah, I think, Ronnie, your challenge in a sense is well made. We are going to be facing, I don't know if it's unprecedented because some of us were, given our age, were around in the 1980s, but it's going to be a challenge of that magnitude. And I think it is important that we look to see how we can release significant resource or attract significant resource to come up with a real focus on employment over the coming months and potentially years. So certainly I'm hoping that officers recognise that that is a huge priority and that they will look as how we can try and maximise the number of jobs we can protect and the number of jobs that we can sort of create as well. Some of it does tie into the discussion we've just had around what funding potentially we will get from the Scottish and UK governments, what level of potential flexibility that we might be able to have financially as well. The more funding, the more flexibility we get, the more that we can do. But we've absolutely got to see the looming employment crisis is the number one immediate priority for the council and our partners.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% with that, Stephen. And I think the challenges this time are potentially even greater than they were in the past, given that we've lost a real significant number of employers. And that is going to make the task even more difficult than potentially it was in the period that you referred to. So I look forward to seeing that report, Stuart. And, thanks.
Okay, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm kind of beginning to realise that I'm a bit report grumpy today, so I hope I don't come across too grumpy. That's certainly how I feel. But
never, Elizabeth, never.
Thank you. And I'm just looking at the first report, you know, the Alliance Partnership Recovery Plan, and I'm just kind of going, I'm not sure that the partners are really fully expressed in that. For example, our covering report to it, the partners aren't mentioned in it at all. And the partnership structure that's in page 211 of our papers doesn't really translate across the reading of the document. We're allocating £180,000, we're allocating it through that report, the partnership report, rather than our own organisational report, and I think that's right. But when you look at what the resources are that the partners are bringing to the partnership plan, it just seems to say existing core budgets, unless it's the third sector where we've been able to leave our potential, I guess, partnership money in through third sector that we wouldn't as a local authority be able to apply for. So again, I'm just putting out that challenge that I always put in the Alliance context of really expressing a partnership plan that's showing a partnership of equals with I guess resource coming with the place round the table.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair challenge, Aubrey. Scott, you want to pick that up? You're on mute, Aubrey.
How's that? Is that okay? Well, I agree to some extent with Councillor Robertson. It is, I suppose, a challenge that we always have in terms of ensuring that we have partners which have got, I suppose, commitments throughout the country or through different parts of the country in terms of, I suppose, committing the time needed in some of these areas. And notwithstanding that, and certainly by virtue of your own input, Councillor Robertson, we have engaged with members with members of the Alliance with a view to get more information out of them. And as that comes through and a report will be going up to the next Alliance board, we'll pick that up in terms of maybe bolting on that to the recovery plan, which ultimately is a decision of the Alliance board. If you look at page 211, I think the reason why, I mean, that's the government's footprint of the structure, and we've bolted in the Inverclyde Alliance at the bottom of it. But I can understand people probably being a wee bit confused with all the various national groups that we have. But it's a fair point, convener, and we'll certainly pick that up as we move to the Alliance board.
I mean, I think that is part of the challenge that does need to be presented to the Alliance as a partnership. But in some senses, this is a moving feast as well. And I mean, I know, for example, obviously, there's funding that's been allocated for youth jobs guarantees we discussed earlier, and I think a lot of that funding will come through the Skills Development Scotland and through the DYW network, etc. So some of that resource will come to Inverclyde, and we obviously need to factor that into the plan as well. So there may well be further sums that will come as well through various partners. And some of the contributions from partners may well be in-kind contributions as well, and some of it might be about, can you take people and create apprenticeships and things like that as well. So, but it is an important challenge which needs to be made to all the partners, not just I suppose the partners around the Alliance board table, but all the the partners who are involved in the partnership at whatever level. So I think it's something we do want to challenge back on, and Elizabeth's right to make that challenge. And hopefully in advance of the board we can make that challenge at officer level, but certainly at the board, I'm sure Elizabeth and others will make the challenge at elected member level. Elizabeth, you want to come in again?
I think, thank you for letting me come back in. I think Aubrey, picking up on the fact that we've asked Alliance board members to kind of talk about the things that they have done through their day job, if you like, for Inverclyde over the last few years and what they're planning to do over the next couple of years. And I think there is an opportunity to plug some of that into the recovery plan. So I'm heartened to hear that, because I think that would be a valuable means of expressing a sort of more accurate, probably, contribution from the various partners that we know we do work. I just don't think this is expressing it as fully as it might at the minute.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, so with that feedback, can we agree the recommendations? Yep, okay, thanks for that. Moving on to item 16, Inverclyde Council Community Wealth Building Strategy. Stuart's going to speak to that report.
Convener, thank you. This report is to bring community wealth building before the committee. Community wealth building was established in the United States, and it's been championed in the UK by the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, with examples recently in Preston and North Ayrshire. Indeed, Neil McEnroy from CLES is on a part-time secondment to the Scottish Government to promote this type of activity. The report highlights the aspirations for community wealth building, and members will see from Appendix 1 that there are many examples in Inverclyde undertaken within the 5 pillars, and up until now we just haven't badged it. Carrying out community wealth building in its purest sense is not without challenge. However, there is a national, regional and local focus, and officers feel it appropriate that a strategy be developed, including partners as anchor institutions, with an action plan further developed. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, Elizabeth, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I think I couldn't be more happy about the notion of trying this. I think I couldn't be more enthusiastically behind community building if I tried, if you know what I mean. But what I would say is that the report that we've got today, the appendix that we have that says all the things that we're already doing that are community wealth building, I don't know that I find that helpful, and I know that's very counterintuitive to say that. But I think if we want to do community wealth building, we need to see it as something different and something transformative that we are doing almost as new, rather than what the appendix does is make us think we're doing lots of it and we just want to tinker around the edges of it. I think if we're doing community wealth building, if it's something that we want to take on board, then we want to do it as a transformative thing, not a we'll add on a couple of bits to what we're already doing thing. And that's, again, maybe not an opinion that's going to be shared across the committee, but I really think there's an opportunity here to do something that is transformative, that is different, that is completely we've got a chance to do something in ways that we've not done it before, and to be fettered immediately right from the start by the things that we already do, again, is, I think, a missed opportunity.
I mean, before I bring Stuart back in, I mean, what I would probably say in that is that the third recommendation is about agreeing to remit to the corporate director further develop the community wealth building agenda in consultation with partners and the community, and thereafter present to members in the Inverclyde Council Community Wealth Building Strategy and Action Plan. I think if it's going to be a genuine community wealth building strategy, absolutely the community and our partners need to be fully involved in developing that. So in some senses, yeah, you can set aside what we're already doing and develop from first principles. I'm sure that Stuart and Scott are already thinking about how we would develop the strategy and what the engagement process would be. And I think part of that might well be bringing people in from outside to learn lessons from how they've done it elsewhere, etc. But you're right, I think it is about developing that from the bottom up and sort of a blank piece of paper. But we can't ignore the fact that we are doing certain things that potentially could be biased on that. But I think it is important that the strategy has some sort of fundamental review. Stuart, you want to come in, or Scott, or both?
Convener, I don't think we are fettered by the appendices, Councillor Robertson, and the reason that I don't think we should be fettered by the appendices is that we should actually celebrate some of the successes that we've got there. Within Scotland, we're 12th in the league table for spend in the local community. Now, we know that there has been lots of emphasis within Inverclyde Council about ensuring that we maximise spend within the local community, and clearly procurement's one of the 5 pillars. So when we look at what the barriers are to the community being actually able to use the council spend, some of it relates to capacity. There's also the legal aspects associated with it, so that there are areas whereby you simply can't do the aspirations that, in respect of community wealth building if you're going to comply with either national law or European law. So what we have tried within Inverclyde is, for example, we allot contracts to be able to allow local organisations to bid for contracts. So I wouldn't say that we're using Appendix 1 as a limiting factor. I think what we need to do is we need to build on Appendix 1. And that's certainly the aspirations. I'm delighted that I can understand community wealth building, because I couldn't understand inclusive growth. And I'm still waiting on an answer on inclusive growth, but at least we can see where the direction of community wealth building is going. Opportunities are abound, and I think that if we have the opportunity to come up with a proper strategy and action plan, then it's something that will benefit Inverclyde.
Okay, thanks. So Scott, you want to come in?
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I just, again, to add to what Stuart's saying there, we looked at Preston in a lot of detail, and Preston is probably the place that's got the most profile in the UK. And I think the issue about Preston is it started from a low base. So community wealth building in Preston meant they aspired to do an awful lot of things that most Scottish councils, to be honest, do as a matter of course. And I think that kind of explains why, if you think of community wealth building as a new thing, it's not really. We tend to do it as part of what we do in councils in Scotland. But I think what our strategy needs to do is to build upon a strong base and move forward and develop it. And I think that would be the context I would see the strategy developing. I'm happy to have a discussion with anybody in more detail offline about this. It is something we've researched in a lot of detail.
Okay, I'll bring Elizabeth back in if you want to come back in, and then bring Chris in.
I think I will take Scott up on that offer, if that's okay, just to kind of talk about it offline. Yeah, no, other than that, I think I do take on board what everyone's saying, but I stand by my comments as well. So,
okay, Chris, you want to come in?
Thank you, Stephen. I think it's just to raise that I think it's been ongoing frustration that we've not been able to spend more locally with respect to procurement to grow wealth, and I think it's something that I think all members understand and realise that a pound spent in what they call in Inverclyde by us is worth a lot more than a pound spent in Croydon. But I just hope to be able to see find innovative ways we can actually think about how we can actually do this going forward and create the wealth in Inverclyde and use the money that we've got to do it. And I think as I go back to that point, despite the lot, we still don't have the lotting process. We still don't have a lot of local businesses being able to tender on an even playing field, whether or not that's their ability to access the tendering process or what have you. So I'd be keen to see how we develop that going forward to ensure that we create what they call the abilities within the local infrastructure, within the local companies, to actually make sure that they can access these lotted contracts and other contracts going forward.
Now we've left the EU, we won't be fettered by their controls on us. We can do whatever we want to do. That was just a joke, by the way, so don't take it seriously. I don't know, Scott or Stuart, you want to respond to that comment?
Yeah,
Thank you very much, Stuart. We're competing to answer that one. I think the first answer would be, as a small council, we're actually pretty good at this. We're 12th in Scotland. You would expect the cities, given their base, to be in the sort of top tier. So we're doing very well as a council, but we're doing a whole raft of things across our local SMEs and companies to engage them in procurement. And Stuart can cover some of these just quickly just now, if you're happy, convener.
Sure.
Convener, yeah. Supplier development programs are available to all of our local businesses, and we support local businesses through that program, and that builds capacity within the businesses to be able to engage with public sector or anchor organisations. I was at a meeting yesterday with all of the Metropolitan City Region local authorities along with the Scottish Government, and Scottish Government were looking to carry out a project which would be available, which would make a difference across the city region. And I'm afraid I did challenge Mr. McInroy to, if he wanted to come up with an exemplar project to sort out the procurement limitations.
Okay. Polly, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, convener. Warmly welcome the report, and I look forward to see how things progress on it. But on page 262 and 263, we've got maybe in excess of 30 action points. What I would like to see personally is just in coming up in further reports is what steps we're taking to implement these action points, how successful they are. Some may work, some may not work. But I would like to see that finer detail in the further reports. Would that be the case?
I'll bring Ronnie in first, and then I'll bring Stuart back in. Ronnie?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I think for those of us who kind of follow these things, I think we know that North Ayrshire basically are implementing what you would probably describe as the Preston model. And if you're prepared to study it in any great detail, there's a couple of aspects to it that I think I would like someone to comment on. It seems to me that bid actually plays quite a significant part in the Preston model, the Business Improvement District. And frankly, I have never been convinced that that would be successful in Inverclyde. For me, bid is more about organising events. But the second aspect of it, which I was really interested in, is that it looks very much as though they've brought in a panel of inverted commas experts, independent experts, in an advisory panel. And I just wondered if Scott or Stuart would like to comment on that. These are independent people, experienced in the business world, who will take a look at potentially the problems and make some recommendations. And I just wondered what our guys thought about that. Thanks.
Okay, Stuart, you want to come back in on both Councillor McVeigh's and Councillor Alfield's points?
Through you, convener, in my succinct manner to Councillor McVeigh, yes, the action points will be far more refined, or the activities will be far more refined as we go forward. These are discussion points at this stage. With regards to Councillor Alfield's comments, totally agree with you about bids, Councillor Alfield. We've attempted, I think, 4 times to create bids within Inverclyde with absolutely no appetite. And where bids will work in a certain area, they don't always work in other areas, and that's not something that I think we would try to continue to flog. With regards to scrutiny panels or expert panels, we've got a blank sheet of paper on this, and it's certainly something that we can consider taking it forward.
Okay.
Well, thanks for that.
Okay, I don't see anybody else wishing to come in. Charlie, do you want to come in?
It's just about trying this chart thing. It's not what my favourite. I just done it's in page 2554.7 and we'll continue with 258. I'm going to ask you. I know the legal issues is it's got to be 50k before you can, or you have to put out a tender. And all this other stuff. But in 258 it states quite clearly community benefits must be considered for all contracts and embedded within every procurement exercise with a benefits to obtain. And I'm going back to many years ago when there was European funding for stuff. And in Ireland at that time, a lot of people through the trade could use their hours against stuff. Now we could, and we couldn't. And it wasn't until later on then we were told the exact same things. They were saying we had to put money in. Why then do we not make sure the contract's 45k? You're doing it twice, but it's not over. And that's playing them at their own game, isn't it?
Stuart, you maybe want to take legal advice from Jerry before you answer the question, but feel free to answer.
Through you, convener, the legality of all of this is fundamental, and we have to play by the law. What we do have within our existing contracts is there is the opportunity for lotting, but as part of the evaluation, we also have a scenario whereby we do look at local suppliers, but that's within 5% of the overall scoring matrix. So therefore, price and other issues have a heavier bearing than what the local supplier has. And that's what we feel is appropriate at this stage. And that's why I go back to the fundamental success of this will come from the procurement legislation either changing at a Scottish level or indeed at a Westminster level. We have to be legally competent, and I don't need to take advice on that, convener.
Okay, thanks for that, Stuart. Okay, I think that's all the questions. So we're happy to agree recommendations. Okay, thank you. Takes us on to item 17, review of member support. Gerard's going to speak to that.
Thank you, convener. This is a committee instruction to report back on the annual report. Feedback from the consultation exercise, thank you to members for their responses, has been positive. The issue arising from that is that I do not identify that any additional resources for the current range of tasks are needed at this time, and that's included within the report. It has to be said, of course, that the past 6 months have been exceptional, and in view of this, I suggest, in line with the consultation responses received, that the committee consider extending the review for a year, because there have been impacts on how we're working and how members are supported, and I'd be suggesting that a review be extended, possibly until September of next year, the 12-month review. I do make the point, convener, that there are pressures. Facing those pressures, especially in times of elections, electoral events in general, and there are considerable pressures upon the staff who are experienced and who really do assist the council in delivering these major events. I'm quite conscious that with the COVID impact and with what we are going to be facing in the course of the next year in the run-up to the Scottish parliamentary election, that we won't be able to resource all of these demands from within the Legal and Property Service, and the report, which has been endorsed by the CMT, also suggests the involvement of other support staff from other directorates of the council, and that's been approved at the CMT level. And I'll just conclude simply, convener, that referring back to item 10, the workforce information report, and Councillor MacLeod's question on the new ways of working and what's being done about that, that of course is included within this report as well, and that there's reference to the future ways of working for these staff as well, the member support staff as well, in terms of what we've been discussing there at the answer that was given earlier by Stephen and other colleagues. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thanks, Gerard. Any questions or comments, members? Councillor Wilson, are you not prepared to use the chat? You just want to raise your hand?
I was using the chat. I've been chatting with Councillor Clockerty, but it doesn't seem to work to everyone. And I wouldn't like our private conversation to be known by everybody. It would probably embarrass Councillor Clockerty. Thanks for the report, Gerard. I think it's a good report. I agree with it being extended for a year. I do have one or two reservations. I think we need to have a very close look at what happens at elections. The staff we have are quite excellent, but at election time they disappear for 6 weeks because they're the only ones apparently that can do the job. The staff upstairs help out in the phones, but they do not have the intimate knowledge of our wards and our constituents. The regular staff know when somebody phones up, they know which councillors to direct it to right away, and quite often can answer things themselves before it actually gets to us. So I'd like you to have a very close look at how we handle elections. Can we train up people perhaps from education or one of the other directorates to be able to come in and do electoral work? Secondly, very, very pleased, as your report says, with the standard of staff. We're very, very pleased with the standard of staff. The job they do is quite excellent. I experienced that when I was stuck in Australia. The staff were handling things for me on a day-to-day basis in an extremely professional manner. Where we do have problems, I think, is with our facilities. Our lounge is used as a storeroom. We used to have a coffee machine there. The coffee machine is gone. Our diaries were taken away without consultation. If I go up to the 4th floor for a meeting with directors, out appears a cup of coffee or a cup of tea in lovely china. We don't have any china. Our ability to entertain guests is really not very good. And I travel around many councils, and I've not found one yet that doesn't have better facilities than we have. So I would ask that over the next year, we have a further look at our facilities and that we have a look at how we handle staffing at election time. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, Gerard, I'm not expecting you to respond to all those points. That's just some constructive feedback from Councillor Wilson. I think we would all endorse his comments about the staff, and again, we would thank the staff for the work that they did, in particular during the early stages of the pandemic. Okay, there is some comment going in the chat. Could I ask you to refrain from putting stuff like that in the chat, please? I get told off at a COSLA meeting for doing that, so you're getting told off at this meeting. The chat's for professional business only. Okay, anybody want to come in with any other serious comments? No? Okay, can we agree to the recommendations? Right, that takes us on to item 18, updated policy for the retention and disposal of documents and records, paper and electronic. Andrew's going to speak to that report.
Thank you, Convener. Convener, apologies, my connection doesn't seem to be the best today, so apologies if you lose me, but hopefully it lasts for the duration of the 2 reports. The purpose of this report is to provide committee with an overview of the updated retention policy and to seek the committee's approval of the policy. The policy was available on request to committee in advance of today's meeting and will be published on the website once approved. The policy previously was updated on the 19th of May 2015. It ensures compliance with numerous legislation as noted in the report. The updating process, each service updated the relevant sections comparing with relevant legislation and national guidance. In terms of implementation, this continues to progress well. It's an ongoing action, and it's recognised that it will be helpful to establish a records management working group to help move this forward. Progress will be presented to committee later this year as part of the review of the records management plan, which is due to be submitted to the Keeper of the National Records of Scotland this year. So thank you, Convener, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Andrew. Any questions from members? No? Okay, can we agree to the recommendation? Thanks for that. Okay, that takes us on to item 19, investigation by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office regarding the regulation of Investigatory Powers Scotland Act 2000. And again, Andrew.
Thank you, Convener. Apologies, Commissioner, I should say inspection as opposed to investigation there in the title. The purpose of this report is to update the committee on surveillance carried out by the Council in respect of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Scotland Act 2000, known as RIPSA, and advise on the inspection by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, the IPCO, which was carried out in March 2020. Briefly, by way of background, RIPSA provides a legal framework for covert surveillance and use of covert human intelligence sources. This is incorporated into the Council's RIPSA policy and procedure, which is available online, and a link was provided to the committee in advance of today's meeting. The IPCO carries out inspections approximately every 3 years. The previous inspection took place in November 2016, and the outcome was reported back to committee in March 2017. The recent inspection of March 2020 was carried out remotely, and a copy of the report is provided for in Appendix 1. In summary, there were 3 recommendations from the previous inspection which were discharged as detailed in the report. The inspector made 7 new observations. Again, these are detailed in the report, but in summary, they concern non-contentious elements such as amending the policy, providing further training, and complying with data assurance. In terms of the Council's use of RIPSA, since the previous inspection in 2016, there have been 8 directed surveillance authorisations, and all were assessed as appropriate, necessary, and proportionate. Moving forward, it's proposed that reports on the Council's use of RIPSA are submitted on an annual basis to CMT and committee. And thank you, Convener. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. And just to remind members that obviously there is an exempt part of this report, which is item 21. Okay, Ronnie, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Just a very general question. Andrew, where we have CCTV used or installed rather for security purposes, can that be used without authorisation to monitor employees? And if that is the case, who can authorise that? Thanks.
Thank you, Convener. So CCTV is a good question. It's overt, so if it's known, then generally it won't fall under RIPSA, but it can be used as part of a RIPSA investigation, and that's where authorisation would have to be granted. So go through the process. So to answer your question, yes, potentially it could fall under RIPSA.
Okay, any other questions? No, agree recommendations. Okay, that takes us on to item 20A, Mission Clyde, which is a for-noting report. Scott, you got anything to add to the report?
Thank you, Convener. Nothing to add to this report, but happy to answer questions if necessary.
Okay, Elizabeth, I think you want to come in?
I'm okay just now. I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, right. Any other questions? No? Okay,
Stephen.
Jim, you want to come in?
Yeah, it's not so much a question as a comment. I welcome the report, and that's there's a number of initiatives there that I'm hopeful that the district will obviously proceed with. But one of the things I've been very fortunate over the years to travel, as some of you might know, in cruises, and going into different ports, you see the things that other countries and other ports are doing. And, in the past, I've talked about the River Clyde as being our French Riviera. And I remember years ago people saying, you can't compare it to Riviera because we don't have the weather for it. But one of the places I was lucky enough to go to was up to the Baltic and to Oslo and Stockholm and Helsinki, Tallinn and St. Petersburg. And I saw at these ports many things that were happening, and they don't exactly have the glorious sunshine of the Mediterranean. There's lots of things happening in these ports in these countries. I would like to see some of these things happening here. I think there's all sorts of water opportunities that we haven't taken up that we should be looking at doing. And I just hope that the officers will maybe look further north to the Nordic countries to see if there's any ideas that we could incorporate here ourselves.
Well, they do get some extremes of weather, Jim, that we perhaps don't get. They do get really hot summers than really cold winters. Scott, you want to come in on that?
I think, no, I agree with what Jim's saying. I think Clyde Mission gives us an opportunity to take a strategic approach down the Clyde. I think the challenge we're going to face as a council is to make sure that we derive the maximum benefit for Inverclyde because we're part of a bigger partnership and a bigger waterfront. But in principle, yes, I agree that we need to exploit our assets more.
Okay, anybody else want to come in? No, so agree to note. Okay, so item 21 is private. So before we take item 21 and go into private business, we've got two remits from committee. So the first is item 22, waterfront pool movable floor. So the committee basically unanimously agreed, cross-party, that we want to replace this floor. They just didn't come up with the money to replace it. So the report's coming here to the Policy and Resources. So I'm going to ask Alan to advise us what's the best route to fund the replacement of this movable floor.
Thank you, and I hope you can hear me for the duration of this. I think probably the best thing I can do is refer members to the finance boxes in the report in section 9. And within that, the estimated cost of the replacement of the floor is £325,000. The proposal, is subject to committee agreeing, would be that 50,000 of that comes from the core property capital. £40,000 comes from Inverclyde Leisure's own reserves, and the balance of 235,000 comes in the form of a loan from the council to Inverclyde Leisure to pay for the floor, and the terms of that loan to be determined, as has been in the past, between Gerard and myself in discussion with the Chief Executive of Inverclyde Leisure and hopefully the approval of the Inverclyde Leisure Board. So that's really for the minute if members are minded to agree to that. I just wanted to give that clarity.
Okay, thanks for that, Alan. Okay, any questions or comments? So we agreed to fund the replacement in that way? Yep. Okay. Oh, Jim, you want to comment?
It was just really to say, Alan, we all know that Inverclyde Leisure's finances are taking a kicking over the COVID period, and any reserves that it have will now be depleted, because if we're actually supporting Inverclyde Leisure, then they're not going to have any money. So I'm just wondering how viable the options are that we are putting up here for them to pay for this, given the fact that we know that they're not going to be in a firm financial footing for the considerable future. So it's just, okay, we're doing that, and I've got no disagreement with it. It's really just to see how viable those recommendations really are.
Alan?
Thank you, and it was a point that the corporate management team discussed at the time. Obviously, the next item on the agenda highlights the extent of extra council funding that has already been agreed with a request that is increased further to meet specific costs. Linked to that is the need for Inverclyde Leisure to put in a new business plan to the council before the turn of the year. Subject to members agreeing this proposal, then the costs of that, the repayment of this loan, in terms of and the costs of repaying all the existing loans that they have, the council has 2 or 3 loans in addition to this with Inverclyde Leisure, will be factored into that business plan, and members consider that as part of the overall budget consideration. But the corporate management team felt that the right thing was that Inverclyde Leisure paid for their floor, and the best way to do that was the council giving them a loan.
I mean, clearly there's going to be a significant lead-in time to actually replacing this floor anyway, and we obviously need clarity around the future business plan of Inverclyde Leisure, but we've got to hope that at some point we get back to some semblance of normality, either through a vaccine or whatever, and the Inverclyde Leisure's activities can resume fairly close to where they were pre-pandemic. And then they can afford to repay a long-term loan. But yeah, I mean, in the short term, they're obviously facing significant challenges that we need to help them address. Okay, so we agree that recommendation from officers. Okay, right, that takes us on to the linked issue of item 23, which is Inverclyde Leisure funding, again a wee bit from committee, and essentially again this was about us providing an additional £80,000 of funding to Inverclyde Leisure, over and above the funding that's already factored into our support. And the committee also agreed at my request that we consider the additional costs of reopening Port Glasgow Pool, which currently is not planned to reopen before Easter 2021. So Inverclyde Leisure have obviously come back on that with a proposed cost. So I'll maybe bring Ruth in just to fill us in a wee bit on that before we discuss it.
So I won't rehearse the difficulties that Inverclyde Leisure have. So this they've got an indicative phasing plan prior to bringing back a revised business plan. We're asking for £80,000, which the committee didn't have on top of the 820,000. But the additional remit was looking at, in addition to opening the waterfront pool, opening Port Glasgow swimming pool. So we've looked at the figures around that. It's just over £51,000. Members have to remember that will be with reduced capacity. People will be expected to arrive beach ready. There'll be bookable lane swimming slots. But we reckon that there will be roughly about 218 swimmers would access it a week, and there would be about 50 from the swim school. So that's what we're opening up. And to be clear, that's only just till Easter that's costed on.
Okay, Councillor Wilson, you want to ask a question? David.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Ruth, I'd just like to go to 2.4 in your report, where you say it's anticipated that the Beacon Arts Centre will not need any additional funding in this financial year. Is that to the end of March?
Yes.
I think that my party is comfortable with the expenditure here in Inverclyde Leisure. We're quite happy with that, but we are, I've got to say, quite uncomfortable going forward that really our support for the Beacon for additional money beyond what we're committed to cannot really be taken for granted. We're really quite uncomfortable as things go forward. Thank you.
Okay, but that obviously is not part of the remit anyway from the committee, but thanks for clarifying that, Councillor Wilson. Okay, so are we happy to agree to the requests for additional funding of 80,000, general funding for Inverclyde Leisure, and 51,000 specifically so that Port Glasgow pool can reopen on the 5th of October?
Yes.
Great, okay, thanks for that. Right, that's the end of public business. I don't know if Susan's still with us or not.
I think she left some time ago. If I could just ask Mr. Malone to confirm that, please.
Yeah.
Second participant, Convener, just bear with me a second.
Yeah, I was thinking of leaving about an hour ago myself.